His podcast,
he'll be all right. He's got, is it Goldanger Productions, the podcast? They make a load of fantastic podcasts, including The Rest is History, The Rest is Politics and everything. He'll be all right.
And I honestly feel...
He ain't going to starve.
I do feel like he knows that his time at the BBC is coming to an end and he wants them to sack him.
You do wonder,
so he goes out in a blaze of glory.
That sort of almost death wish, really.
Yeah.
Here's my chin.
No, it's not a death wish, it's a martyrdom wish.
Right.
Yeah.
He wants to be seen as a free speech martyr being dragged out of Bush House.
Echoes of Suella Braverman here, the former Home Secretary. Was she not angry to be fired so she could be the martyr on the backbenches?
Longing for it.
Imagine how
Who'd have ever thought?
Imagine how popular he's going to be, though, at all of those lovely bougie dinner parties.
Oh, yes. But who'd have thought you'd get Suella Braverman and Gary Lineker in the same Venn diagram in terms of any sort of cultural discussion?
So the thought of overlap slightly worries
What a world we're living in.
And who would replace him as football commentator? Not that I know anything about it.
Well, I have to say, GBNews has an extremely good football commentator. Coyle is excellent.
We do.
It was referred to on the letters page of the Daily Telegraph. People said you could get Paul for probably a lot less money. An awful lot less money.
So we're about 2 minutes away from Rishi Sunak. Is it Rishi Sunak?
He's just arrived in the chamber,
facing off Sir Keir Starmer. Here they are.
Interesting, he's sitting next to the Home Secretary. That's all show of support for the Home Secretary. And, of course, Rishi Sunak last night warmly embraced the Chief Whip, Simon Hart, because not a single Tory MP voted against Rwanda. He's smiling and looking very chirpy. It's not going to last, is it? Because in January and February, it'll come back to bite him.
And as you said, Andrew, will be marmalised.
I think it will be.
That's my word of the morning, I think, that that bill will be marmalised in terms of Rwanda. And where does that leave the British people wanting to see the boats stopped? And where does that leave the people who want to come over
frustrated.
here? Yeah.
I mean, it says to me when the boats keep coming across, it just shows a government that's impotent.
Well, it's also about geopolitics. We're facing more multipolar geopolitical situation, and the message this sends to other countries is that Britain is a doormat. We're a walkover. We're mugs, and you can get away with walking all over us, and we'll be totally impotent and unable to do anything because we're in a political state of paralysis.
I mean,
it's a terrible message.
As long as we don't have the biometric digital ID system coming over the horizon, you can see that. Anyway,
right,
sadly, they're not talking about that
calling
today.
The Prime Minister, so we're handing over now to Tom and Emily.
As the last Prime Minister's question before recess, I know the whole House will want to join me in wishing you and all the House staff a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I know members will also want to join me in sending our warmest wishes to our armed forces, both at home and stationed overseas, and our emergency services and all those who will be working over Christmas too. And finally, I know everyone will want to join me in wishing Mark Drakeford all the best as he moves on from his many, many years of devoted public service. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Can I concur with the comments of the Prime Minister about our armed forces, Christmas and Mark Drakeford? My constituent, Mr. Speaker, Fred Bates, is 74, he has liver cancer and he's a victim of the contaminated blood products scandal. The Prime Minister had a chance to do right by Fred last week, but failed to do so and lost the vote in this House. After half a century, Fred wishes to know when he and fellow survivors will be compensated and get justice.
Now, Mr. Speaker, this was an appalling tragedy, and my thoughts remain with all those concerned. I absolutely understand the strength of feeling on this. It was this government previously who set up the inquiry, which I participated in, and we fully understand the need for action. The government has crucially already accepted the moral case for compensation and acknowledged that justice does need to be delivered for the victims. My right honourable friend, the Minister for the Cabinet Office, will update the House on our next steps on the infected blood inquiry shortly.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tax cuts in the autumn statement were extremely welcome. But in order to go further and to get the tax burden as low as it possibly can be, accurate and robust economic modelling is required. The Office of Budget Responsibility have been habitually wrong, and we had the spectacle last week of the head of the OBR saying that his latest forecast might be 30 billion out. So will my right honourable friend commit to finding a better system of financial modelling so we can get taxes lower?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, the OBR has brought greater transparency and independence to the forecasting on which government policy is based. But he's right, and it is required to produce an assessment of its accuracy, of its fiscal and economic forecasts at least once a year. But crucially, as he acknowledged, thanks to our management of the economy, the fact that we have halved inflation, controlled borrowing, we now have delivered the largest tax cuts in a generation, Mr. Speaker, and they will benefit families up and down the country from January.
The Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday we heard of the tragic death of a young man on the Bibby Stockholm. I know the whole House will want to send our deepest condolences to his family and friends. We must never let this happen again. I would also like to mark the retirement of my colleague and friend, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. Mark committed his life to public service and lives his values every day. Quietly and patiently, Mark has been a titan of Labour and Welsh politics, and we thank him for his service and wish him well. Mr. Speaker, Christmas is a time of peace on earth and goodwill to all. Has anyone told the Tory party?
Mr. Speaker, Christmas is also a time for families, and under the Conservatives we do have a record number of them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to this point, at the beginning of the year I set out some priorities that this government would deliver for the British people, and over the course of this year we have, Mr. Speaker. Inflation halved, Mr. Speaker, the economy growing, debt falling, action on the longest waiters, the boats down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from honourable friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he's kicked the can down the road. But in the last week, his MPs have said of him he's not capable enough, he's inexperienced, he's arrogant, a really bad politician. When they're shouting, this is what they said. So, well, come on. Who was it who said he's a really bad politician? Hands up. They're shouting. Well, what about inexperienced? Who was that? And now there's got to be some hands for this. He's got to go. Shy. Apparently, he's holding a Christmas party next week.
Order. It's Christmas. No, but you might not want the Christmas present that I could give you. So please,
Apparently, he's holding a Christmas party next week. How's the invite list looking?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for all the comments. What I would say to him, he should hear what they have to say about him, Mr. Speaker.
Right. Do you want to be the first one? Because it is Christmas and I'm going to hear it. My constituents are going to have a Christmas like everyone else. They want to know how their Christmas is going to be affected. So we want less of it from all sides. Keir Starmer.
Speaker, they've obviously found the donkey for their nativity. The search of three wise men may take a little longer. But while they fight amongst themselves, there's a country out here that isn't being governed, where more than 100,000 people are paying hundreds more a month on their mortgages, energy bills going back up in January, the economy shrinking again, NHS waiting lists an all-time high. Doesn't he think the government would be better off fixing the messes they've already made rather than scrambling to create new ones?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about governing and spent the first two questions talking about political tittle-tattle, Mr. Speaker. What a joke! Well, let's get on to the subject. substance, Mr. Speaker. Let's get on to the substance. You mentioned the things. What is the news that we've just heard in the last week? Well, what's the most important thing? The most important thing is education, Mr. Speaker, because that's how we spread opportunity in our country. And what have we learned? Where are the schools performing best in the United Kingdom? In England, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the reforms of this Conservative government, rising up the league tables, giving our kids the start they need. And where are they plummeting down? In Labour-run Wales.
He talks about children. Nearly 140,000 children are going to be homeless this Christmas. That is more than ever before. That's a shocking state of affairs, and it should shame this government. Instead of more social housing, house building is set to collapse. Instead of banning no-fault evictions, thousands of families are at risk of homelessness. Rather than indulging his backbenchers swanning around in their factions and their star chambers, pretending to be members of the mafia, when's he going to get a grip and focus on the country?
Let's just look at the facts. Let's look at the facts, actually, because rough sleeping in this country is down by 35%, Mr. Speaker, since its peak, thanks to the efforts of this government. There are hundreds of thousands of fewer children in poverty today, thanks to this government, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to home building, again, what is he doing? We just had the data this last week. In the last year, an almost record number of new homes delivered, Mr. Speaker, more than in any year of the last Labour government.
140,000 children homeless this Christmas, and he's utterly tone deaf. And the rise in homelessness shows how these Tory crises merge and grow and damage the country. Families like the Bradys in Wiltshire, both parents working full-time, with 2 young children, forced out of their home of 15 years by a no-fault eviction, now living in their van. Or 11-year-old Liam Walker, homeless this Christmas. He wrote a letter to Santa saying, "Please, can I have a forever home? I don't want any new toys. I just want all my old toys out of storage. I just want us to be happy again." Is there anything that could shame this government into putting the country first? Then it's surely this little boy.
Mr. Speaker, if he really cared about building homes... If he really cared about building homes, when there was an opportunity in this House, Mr. Speaker, in this House, to back our plans to reform defective EU laws, to unlock 100,000 new homes, Mr. Speaker, what did he do? What did he do? He went in front of the cameras and said one thing and came in here and blocked it. Typical shameless opportunism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the world's...
One more.
Mr. Speaker, is that really his Christmas message to Liam? Cocooned in his party management breakfast. He just can't see the country.
Order. Mr. Cleverly, please. It's Christmas. I want a little bit of silence. And I'm going to get it one way or another. And that goes to each side. Keir Starmer.
Cocooned in his party management breakfast, he just can't see the country in front of him and what they've done. I'll finish by thanking hard-working families across Britain who kept our country going. It's been an impossibly difficult year for so many. I want to pay special tribute to our key workers, particularly those in the emergency services and those serving abroad in our forces, who, even at this time of year, are doing the vital work of protecting their country. I wish everyone, including the members opposite, a very happy and peaceful New Year. Will the Prime Minister join me?
Prime Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, he missed that I paid tribute to our emergency workers at the beginning of the session, Mr. Speaker. But let's see. No, because I think it is important, because he talked about working families. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I want to make sure that we support working families, and that's what we're actually delivering, Mr. Speaker, because all he has to offer them is borrowing £28 billion a year. which all it will do is push up their mortgage rates and push up their taxes. Meanwhile, what have we done? Delivered tax cuts for millions of working families, boosted the national living wage, Mr. Speaker, recruited 50,000 more nurses, 20,000 more police officers, improved our schools. We've cut the cost of net zero for those working families. We've cut the boat crossings by a third and we've halved inflation. And that's the difference, Mr. Speaker. We're getting on and delivering for working Britain.
Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the world struggles to agree the future of the 1.5 commitment, in Wimbledon we're keen to do our bit. So to help my campaign to make EV charging access more widespread, can I ask my right honourable friend for 2 early Christmas presents? Will you speak to our right honourable friend, the Chancellor, to ask him to look again at the unfair differential rates of VAT on public and private charging points? And will he ask our friend, our right honourable friend, the Levelling Up Secretary, to look at the bylaws that stop local councils making on-street parking and charging more accessible?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to tell my honourable friend that the Chancellor has already authorised over £2 billion of investment to support our transition to zero-emission vehicles, and we are well on track to reach 300,000 charge points by 2030. And I can also tell him that we will consult on amending the National Planning Policy Framework to make sure that it prioritises the rollout of charge points, on top of the funding of almost £400 million to support local authorities, spread these out so all our families have access to them when they need.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister please share his Christmas message for children being bombed in Gaza this winter?
Prime Minister.
No. Mr. Speaker, nobody wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary. We urgently need more humanitarian pauses to get all the hostages out and to get life-saving aid into Gaza to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. And we have been consistent that we support what is a sustainable ceasefire, which means Hamas must stop launching rockets into Israel and release all the hostages.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, if the current actions of the Israeli government continue, then it is estimated that almost 1,400 more children will die between now and Christmas Day. Now, in the United Nations last night, our friends and allies in France, in Ireland, in Canada, in Spain and in Australia, they joined with 148 other nations to vote with courage, care and compassion for a ceasefire. The UK, they shamefully abstained. How can the Prime Minister possibly explain why 153 nations are wrong, yet Westminster is right?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said consistently, we're deeply concerned about the devastating impact of the fighting in Gaza on the civilian population. Too many people have lost their lives already, and this is something that we've stressed, and I've stressed personally to Prime Minister Netanyahu just last week. And what we are doing practically is to get more aid into Gaza, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary is appointing a UK humanitarian coordinator, and in my conversations last week with Prime Minister Netanyahu, I pressed him on opening up the Kerem Shalom crossing so that more aid can flow in, and we're actively exploring the opportunity for maritime corridors, something that the UK is well placed to lead, and I can give him my assurance that we will work night and day to get more aid to those who desperately need it.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We expect our young folk to remain in educational training until they are 18, but many lack transport to get there. With the amazing head teacher of Alston Moor Federation, Jill Jackson, I secured funding from the council to get her students to college and pressed the council for a £500,000 bursary scheme to extend youth travel more widely. But we shouldn't have to do this. To secure equality of opportunity and true levelling up, will the Prime Minister look to mandate and support councils to provide post-16 transport so all our young people in towns, cities and rural areas can reach their next stage in life?
My honourable friend and the head teacher of Alston Moor Federation, Jill Jackson, have done a fantastic job in securing more funding, and I wish her well also, I believe, on her upcoming retirement. As he knows, our school travel policy ensures that no child is prevented from accessing education by lack of transport. Not only do we have home-to-school travel policies, but the 16 to 19 bursary fund can be used to support young people with transport costs, and more generally we're taking action to keep bus fares capped at £2, Mr. Speaker, but I'll happily make sure that my honourable friend gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss his proposals further.
Donaldson.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware of unionist concerns about the need to remove the Irish sea border created by the protocol, and that disrupts the UK's internal market. Will the Prime Minister bring forward legislation to amend the UK Internal Market Act and both guarantee and future-proof Northern Ireland's unfettered access to the UK's internal market in all scenarios?
Yeah. Can I thank my right honourable friend? I recognise the need to do more in this area, and I can confirm to him that the government does stand ready to legislate to protect Northern Ireland's integral place in the United Kingdom and the UK internal market, alongside an agreement to restore the executive. We can do this at pace, and I know my right honourable friend and his colleagues are working hard to achieve that. Our NHS, our police officers and the most vulnerable in Northern Ireland need devolved government urgently, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to work day and night to help achieve that.
To Luke Evans.
121 MPs from across the House signed my open letter to supermarkets asking to have a Buy British button online. I'm pleased to announce that last week Morrisons were the first supermarket to implement a Buy British tab. That gives consumers the choice to have homegrown produce and also supports our farmers. So will the Prime Minister join my calls to ask other supermarkets to have the courage to make the change and follow suit?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this government will always back our farmers, and I welcome the work of my honourable friend and the National Farmers Union on this particular issue. We absolutely support calls for industry-led action on this topic. I welcome the news about the Buy British button at Morrisons, and I can tell my honourable friend that we will continue to encourage all retailers to do all they can to showcase the incredible food produced right here in the United Kingdom.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The marriage plans of thousands of couples were dashed last week by the sudden announcement of a big increase in the salary requirement for a spouse visa. Can the Prime Minister give any reassurance to those with very well advanced marriage plans which appear now to have been scuppered, and to families already in the UK who need to extend their stay who won't comply with the new rules? Can he at least offer some transitional help for families, or does his party's support for the family now only apply to the highly paid?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a long-standing principle that anyone bringing dependents to the UK must be able to support them financially. We should not expect this to be at the taxpayers' expense, and the threshold hasn't been raised in over a decade. It's right that we have now brought it in line with the median salary. The family immigration route, as he knows, does contain provision for exceptional circumstances, but more generally it's also right, and I can tell him, to look at transitional arrangements to ensure that they are fair, and the Home Office are actively looking at this and will set out further information shortly.
Olin Mumbycroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I make no apology for raising once again the issue of steel. We are at serious risk now of losing the ability to make virgin steel here in the UK. I know the government are working hard on this, but it is a matter of national security, and we need the Prime Minister's leadership on this issue. What is he doing to ensure that we are able to make our own virgin steel and we don't lose it under his watch?
Mr. Speaker, can I praise my honourable friend's leadership for championing her local community, but also the steel industry in the UK, and she's right to do so, because it is an incredibly important part, not just of our local communities, but of our economy and security, and she is right to put this issue on the agenda. We are committed to working with the steel sector to secure a decarbonised future, supporting local economic growth and our levelling up agenda. That includes our commitment for major support with energy costs, but also access to hundreds of £millions of grants to support energy efficiency and decarbonisation. I obviously can't comment on conversations with individual companies, but you can see our track record in working with either Celsa or Tata Steel that we have been able to support our fantastic steel industry and will always continue to do so.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A road company has walked away from 13,000 tonnes of hazardous waste in Lancaster, and it's now been on fire for 10 days. There are plumes of smoke covering our city. Lancaster City Council has been left to pick up the tab, and to date they've spent £262,000. Without government support and intervention, this fire will burn for several months. So will the Prime Minister support my local council with swift government support?
Yeah. Can I thank the honourable member for raising this incredibly important question? I know she's been working alongside my honourable friend, the member for Morecambe, on this. And can I also thank the emergency services in her constituency? Now, my understanding is that Lancaster City Council, the Environment Agency, and the UK HSA and emergency services are working together to ensure that the health risks and environmental consequences are minimised. But I will ensure that the relevant minister understands the absolute urgency of the issue that she's raised, and I'll make sure that she meets with them as soon as possible.
Jerome Mayo.
Mr. Speaker, some dental practices are taking advantage of post-COVID demand to take their NHS practices private, earning more money but leaving behind those most in need. Training a dentist cost constituents in Broadland more than £300,000. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that if a dentist accepts public funding in order to qualify, they should be asked to commit to NHS dentistry for a number of years before going private?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and we are investing £3 billion into dentistry. The dentistry contract with the NHS was reformed last year to improve access for patients, and around half of all treatment were delivered to non-paying adults and children. The number of adults has gone up by 10%, the number of children by 15%, but my honourable friend is right, and more needs to be done, and that's why the government will be bringing forward the dentistry recovery plan in due course.
I should have called over.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 12 days until Christmas, and hundreds of families in Battersea will be worried. Not about being able to buy gifts for children, but whether they can afford food and heat for their homes due to the Tories' cost of living crisis. Over 4,300 emergency food supplies were provided in Battersea by the Wandsworth Food Bank this year, and they have told me that they are bracing for the worst winter yet. So what is the Prime Minister doing to ensure families do not go cold and hungry this Christmas?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we care deeply about making sure those who are most vulnerable in our society get the support that they need through the winter. That's why we increased welfare by record amounts earlier this year. We supplemented that with cost of living payments of £900 for the most vulnerable. It's why we supported those with energy bills who need our help the most. Pensioners in her constituency and elsewhere will receive up to £300 alongside their winter fuel payment. And indeed, that support lasts not just through the winter, but into next year, because we're deeply committed to helping those who need it, and this government has got a track record of delivering that help.
Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is rightly focused on taking long-term decisions to improve the lives of people in this country. So can I make a suggestion? Our mental health legislation is 40 years old, and we made a manifesto commitment in 2017 and 2019 to reform the Mental Health Act, because we have people with learning disabilities and autism sectioned under the Act being kept an inappropriate accommodation for long periods. We have people sectioned under that Act not receiving the compassionate care that they deserve and, in a sense, are criminalised. And we have people sectioned under that Act who have their mental health condition re-stigmatised by the act of sectioning. So, would the Prime Minister, in the absence of a bill in the King's Speech, would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and other like-minded colleagues to discuss how we might be able to take forward reform of the Mental Health Act, because it simply isn't fit for the 21st century?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue. He's absolutely right about the work that needs to be done, and I'm grateful to the Joint Committee on the draft Mental Health Bill, and our intention is, when parliamentary time allows, to bring forward a bill. I'd be happy to meet with him and colleagues to discuss this, but also just remind everyone that we are undertaking the largest expansion of mental health services in a generation, £2.3 billion of extra funding by March of next year, increasing capital investment in mental health urgent care centres, and, under the long-term workforce plan, the largest expansion of the mental health workforce that we've ever seen in this country.
Speller. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rather than the headline chaos of a government that is dominating the media, much more important to the public, business and organisations is their deeply unsatisfactory day-to-day experience in engaging with this dysfunctional administration. As far as they can see, Britain isn't working. When's he going to get a grip?
Mr. Speaker, the most pressing issue facing families is the cost of living, which is why this government has delivered what it said, which was to halve inflation, Mr. Speaker. Not just that, we are supplementing that with significant tax cuts benefiting working families from January, £450 for a typical person in work, demonstrating that we are absolutely on the side of hard-working families, and this government is cutting their taxes.
Mr. Speaker, breast cancer survival rates have improved, but we need to go further on harder-to-reach cancers. There is a drop-in Parliament this afternoon on lobular breast cancer and the research we need. Could my right honourable friend or his excellent new Secretary of State for Health find time in their busy diaries to join us?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for the work that he does on this specific and important issue. I'm happy to tell him the Health Secretary, I believe, is attending this afternoon's event to hear more about its work, and I can assure him that we're focused on fighting cancer on all fronts: prevention, diagnosis, treatment, research and funding. We are making good progress, but there's always more we can do, and I look forward to hearing from him after this afternoon's event.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While Home Secretary was in Rwanda signing his new treaty, his department put out a contract to manage small boat arrivals until 2030 at a £700 million cost to the taxpayer. Doesn't this show that even the Home Office doesn't think the Minister's plan will work?
It's a total mischaracterisation, Mr. Speaker, of what was put out, which was an advert, not a commitment. But what I can say to the honourable lady, I'm glad that she now cares about this issue.
Well, we've just been listening to Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons, the final Prime Minister's questions of term as MPs break up for Christmas recess at the end of this week.
It felt like it, didn't it?
It really did.
It felt a bit like end of term. But joining us in the studio is Conservative MP for Bracknell, James Sunderland, who's been watching and listening to his colleagues. Let's just ask your general perspective on that. There was quite a lot of joking at the start.
Yeah, I've been an MP for 4 years. Huge privilege. I've been very concerned since day one that politicians have to raise the bar of what they say and what they do. Hence, I was disappointed today by what I heard. I thought that Keir Starmer was very subjective. It was unnecessary to bring Christmas in the way that he did. I felt very strongly as though he didn't need to insult the Prime Minister, and it got off to the wrong foot.
You might say that this is the last Prime Minister's questions of term. Isn't it right to sort of make those jokes about goodwill to all men, sort of have a bit of a lighter tone? And then, as Keir Starmer did, those first three questions were sort of perhaps more irrelevant or whatever. But then the final two or the final three were more substantive.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that PMQs is really important. It may be the only time that people in the UK and beyond see politics on TV. They may watch it, and therefore we've got to put on a show. But it's got to be objective. It's got to be about policy. It's got to be about what the country is doing, what the opposition are doing to hold the government to account. So I was disappointed by the nature of the questioning today.
I guess the Conservative Party have given Keir Starmer quite a lot to have a dig about. Particularly the headlines this week have been all about turmoil at the heart of government, turmoil within the party, the 5 families which were mentioned too, although that was by Rishi Sunak himself. Actually, the 5 families, different groups of Conservatives who were thinking about voting against the government when it came to the Rwanda bill. Of course, Rishi Sunak did win that in the end, and it has passed for now. So what I'm saying is that the Conservative Party have given him quite a lot to say, to joke about.
Well, I think the media loves a good story. We could see them yesterday in the gallery, salivating for a story. Great disappointment, of course, when the government won the bill, getting through yesterday on the vote. But the important point to note for me is that yesterday, not a single Conservative voted against the Rwanda bill. we know that every single Labour MP voted against the need to curb illegal migration. The party, actually, my party, are pretty united on the need to stop the boats. Of course, the issue is how we do that. And that's where we get into legal speak and Section 35 and the key issues that we've been discussing behind closed doors this week.
It's interesting, though, that there was almost this sort of hyped up speculation about whether the government would only win the second reading of this bill by a small margin, or whether it could even lead to a defeat. Perhaps Number 10 played up to all that speculation by getting Graham Stewart to fly back from the Middle East and have all sorts of select committees cut short their research trips as well. Was this a game of expectations management from Number 10?
Maybe. I mean, I think the important thing for me, of course, is the fact that we've got important votes. It's important for ministers and for members of the government and for other MPs to be there. I think that's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is the fact that the Prime Minister and Number 10 were engaging all the way through this week and the weekend. There's been quite an important whipping effort to talk to colleagues and listen to their concerns.
But it was never really in doubt. It won by 44 votes.
I think I get the impression that the Prime Minister was genuinely worried. I mean, let's remember, we were reporting Mark Francois outside Portcullis House in Westminster saying that this bill was incomplete and that it should be dropped and revised. So the Prime Minister must have been worried, genuinely.
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm the Home Office PPS, so I see these things from the inside. I think the figures were always going to be good for us. But I think it's important to engage with colleagues. We've agreed to do that. There's work to do now behind closed doors in advance of the report stage and then third reading. So I'm pretty comfortable that the right wing of the party have got a lot to play for. It's important to them. You've got to listen to them. Their view is not without merit, but this is a government that listens, a government that does work together as a team, and we are a team, and it's very important that we get this bill through.
But how much can actually change at report stage, at the committee stage in the House of Commons? A lot of people may well have voted last night on the basis that this bill is tightened up in the new year, particularly Section 4 of the bill that refers to those individual circumstances where someone might be able to claim to a court that they're ill or something and therefore don't go to Rwanda. How can that be tightened up at report stage?
Well, I think it's about giving assurances. So, for example, within Section 35, the ability to appeal, it's quite important that people do have that right to appeal. Why? Because in law, rapists and murderers and others have the right to appeal. So we've got to make sure that we do comply with international law. Yes, it's right to disapply elements of the HRA. That's work that needs to be done in due course, in my view, anyway. But I also think it's right that we do not leave the European Court for Human Rights as a red line for the Prime Minister. So what the Prime Minister has to do is to pitch his market in the sand. He's got to get to a point where he's comfortable that the bill goes as far as it needs to stop the boats, but by the same token doesn't go too far that he loses the left of the party, One Nation Group in particular. It's also really important to get it through the Lords. It's important that people come with us. And given that the Tory party is united on the need to stop the boats and to curb illegal immigration, it's really important, in my view, to get behind the Prime Minister.
The bill as it stands disapplies sections 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8 and 9 of the Human Rights Act. That's a vast, vast gutting of that 1998 Tony Blair legislation. Do you really believe the House of Lords will accept that?
Well, wait and see. But the important thing is this. The Prime Minister is very comfortable making bold decisions. He's done that. This is very bold, ambitious legislation, which has gone through the House yesterday at second reading. This is a statement of intent from the Prime Minister to get this sorted. Labour Party want open borders. Fact. They haven't yet voted in support of any measure to curb illegal immigration. The Tories want to curb immigration.
Well, Keir Starmer has said that he is considering looking at some kind of scheme of offshore processing.
Funny old thing.
Very different from Rwanda. So if this bill is going to do the job and stop the boats, and it will deal with those legal challenges, why are so many of your colleagues so concerned that it won't do that?
Well, I think that the preference for some of my colleagues is that they stop the right of appeal completely. I don't think that's workable. I think there is a need for colleagues to see planes take off. I think they want to see the small boats stop overnight. If it was that easy, it would have been done before. This is very difficult legally. It's very difficult to make sure that we work within international law. We've got to make sure that we honour our international commitments. So the Prime Minister and his team of lawyers, for months and months and months, have been poring over this. I'm absolutely confident that Number 10 has got the right solution. But it may well be that it doesn't deliver everything that colleagues want. But the important point for me is this. Politics is an imperfect sport. It's about compromise. You can't always have what you want, and that's part of being part of a team.
Well, James, we'll come back to you in a moment. We're going to cross now to Westminster, where our political editor, Christopher Hope, is for us. And, Christopher, you were listening there to Prime Minister's questions. A fairly festive mood in the chamber.
Yeah, so there was an odd ending to Keir Starmer's 6 questions. He urged the PM to wish everyone happy Christmas, and the PM didn't. I mean, he thinks he got one over on Labour, really, on his opponents, forgive me, behind him in the Tory party last night. That's Rishi Sunak. Some interesting use of the amphitheatre, Tom and Emily, when Sir Keir Starmer read out comments made anonymously to reporters, and he said, hands up who said the PM is inexperienced, hands up who said he's really bad at politics. It was a jolly exchange, I think, not much learned. You did hear a bit of chat about migration there. I know that's clearly a huge issue still for the party as it faces these crucially difficult times, trying to see whether they can amend the Rwanda bill next month. The PM said that Labour is against this plan. Now, clearly what's going to happen as they go forward, and Geoffrey Cox has told us, the former Attorney General, there's now a better than even chance of flights taking off in May. If the Tories can make this happen and deliver the Rwanda plan, and if flights start taking off, this issue will become harder and harder for Labour to say they're going to axe this plan if it starts to work. So clearly there's a chance here. It's a rare chance for the PM in recent weeks, but he's on the up, and he enjoyed that PMQs, I believe.
Chris, quite a different style of questioning from Keir Starmer from the previous weeks.
Yeah.
Last week, very much pressing on one issue. Keir Starmer dotting around, yes, a few jokes, a few digs here and there, then moving on to homelessness, back to some immigration issues. It was very different.
Yeah. I think they weren't really sure what to ask about, because I do know that senior figures in the government were preparing for Labour to table a no-confidence vote in this government had they lost last night, and the whips weren't entirely sure because of that infected blood defeat last week, which was the first defeat of Mr Sunak's time as Prime Minister. That was not seen coming, that wasn't expected. The whips blame it on the fact that the actual attempt to bring round rebels only emerged at 8 PM last week. That meant that the whips weren't entirely sure they were going to win as well as they did until around lunchtime yesterday, with that 44 majority confirmed last night. I think that Labour were looking at going really hard on disunity, a collapsing government, maybe even trying to stoke the flames by a performative attempt, a no-confidence motion. That hasn't happened, so I think he wasn't really clear what he was doing there, and by the end it kind of dribbled out into nothing when Sir Keir Starmer sat down. And I certainly haven't seen Sunak himself being so full of beans like that for a few weeks now.
Yes, he accused him of shameless opportunism, was it?
He did. But, Chris, I want to ask you about this vote last night. Was it ever actually in doubt? Of course, the government does have a sizable majority. They won by a sizable majority. Was this, in fact, this rarest of things in British politics, a competent communications operation from Number 10?
Well, it was in some doubt because when that ERG, the ERG, Tom and Emily, came out on Monday, the European Research Group, saying this bill is not going to work, it's unamendable in order to deliver on the promise of stopping the boats. Now, the reason why the ERG put that out on Monday lunchtime was to give 36 hours to talk to the whips about it. And by the time they got to the following lunchtime, yesterday lunchtime, it was clear that the idea was to abstain, not to try and vote against, because the risk to the government. MPs are very aware. One senior MP told me over breakfast today that it wasn't really about small boats, it was about shoring up support for Sunak. They know they've got to get through to next October, November, when interest rates should have come down, the world feels a better place. It's 2 years since the Liz Truss administration, widely, maybe unfairly, but widely blamed for people's mortgages going up. And they want to get that far. They can't go for a short election in the spring. So as much much as it was for small votes is a big issue, the big majority last night was also about their own futures and ensuring there's no election in short order.
Well, Christopher Hope, thank you so much for bringing us all of that there from outside Westminster. A really fascinating digest of what happened last night. Interestingly, we played a little clip of James Cleverly speaking in the House of Commons during that interview, just as sort of picture over the conversation. And behind James Cleverly's shoulder, almost by magic, James Sunderland appeared on the green benches. You're still with us now.
We couldn't see all of you, though, could we, there?
That was probably a good thing.
Just your tie.
But as a PPS in the Home Office, having worked for both Suella and now James Cleverly, do you notice a difference in style or indeed in results between these two different Home Secretaries?
As a former military man, of course, you'll expect me to be very loyal and very discerning with what I say. I've got huge admiration and respect for both individuals. I enjoy working for Suella. In 12, 13 months working for her, she worked really hard. I never saw a crossword from her. I never saw her raise her voice, get cross with anybody. Very focused, very laser-like, very, very easy to work for. And with James now, 3 or 4 weeks in, he has made an immediate impact in the Home Office. He has put this thing through the House yesterday. He's made the statement on legal migration, of course. He's had to deal with a Supreme Court judgment. So what I see now is somebody who is equally focused, who is working with the team at the Home Office and delivering for the UK.
So no difference?
Different style, but in terms of output, both good operators, both clever people. I enjoy working for both. So I'm not going to be sort of stoking the fires at all, but I have huge admiration for both individuals, different style, but I think James is the right man for the job now, and I think he'll do a great job.
Of course, there was a bit of a clear-out in your department. Suella was let go by the Prime Minister, and the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, resigned. Were you never tempted to resign?
No, because I put loyalty first. I was basically very happy in the Home Office. I still am. I enjoy the work. I want to see it through. Great ministers, great people, and a great team of people working behind the scenes of the Home Office as well. Good SPADs, of course. There's a brand new team of SPADs that have come in with James. James has brought his team in from the Foreign Office. Good people. And what I would say to you is that the quality of output amongst professional people at Westminster is very good. They work under real pressure. I think politicians work under extreme duress most of the time. They're under scrutiny the whole time. They're attacked the whole time. We discussed this earlier. The vitriol, the abuse on social media in particular. But my humble view is that politicians I meet in the main are decent, they're hard-working on both sides of the House and work in good faith.
James, are you not frustrated, though, at working within the Home Office about the fact that we have record levels of legal migration, extremely high levels of illegal migration under a Conservative government? When people put their cross in the Conservative box at an election, they don't expect that.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I was elected in 2019 on a manifesto promise to take back control of our borders, to reduce migration. We have had the pandemic. We've lost people from the workforce, very sadly. People have gone home. And we've got huge vacancies across the UK. So I think it's the right thing to do in the short term to increase the flow of those coming across, noting that of that 700,000 figure published recently, the vast majority are students on student visas. We have now stopped dependents coming across with the students. We've made a clear commitment a few weeks ago to lower legal migration. It is the right thing to do. Why? Because our public services are bursting at the seams, and we've got to get back to the point where we. With
all due respect, we have known that for years, that immigration has been too high for our public services and infrastructure.
You are quite right. The figure was a surprise to many people. I think that we've got work to do to bring it down. And the Home Office is absolutely committed, as is the government, to bring down legal migration, as it is committed to stopping illegal migration.
Well, we've got to go to a break now, but James, thank you so much for talking us through those big issues, not just PMQs, but also the inner workings of the Home Office. We'll be back very soon with more after this.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. You're with us here on GB News, and we're talking about Prime Minister's questions. It's been the last session of term, and it's been a bit of a Barney in the House of Commons.
Yeah, it felt a bit like the end of term, particularly Keir Starmer's line of questioning. It was a little all over the place, wasn't it, James? James is with us, Conservative MP for Bracknell, of course, James Sunderland.
I'm still here.
You are still here,
and my
thank you.
And my voice is just about holding out as well. So, yeah, it was quite a difficult PMQs to watch for me because I want to see objective questions, objective policies. I think the personal stuff is completely irrelevant now in politics. It shouldn't be there at all. Politicians have got to raise the bar in terms of what they say and what they do. So disappointed by the questioning, I think, from Keir Starmer.
Well, you mentioned that questioning. Let's remind ourselves of a little moment of that now.
Votes down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from Honourable Friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he's kicked the can down the road. But in the last week, his MPs have said of him, he's not capable enough. He's inexperienced. He's arrogant. A really bad politician.
Well, he's not wrong, is he, James? Because according to a YouGov poll published this morning, Rishi Sunak's popularity has fallen to a new record low. 70% of people have an unfavourable opinion of Rishi Sunak. Why isn't he cutting through?
Well, I can only tell you what I know to be the case. I didn't know Rishi at all well before he became the Prime Minister. And I've met him several times since then. In every single engagement we've had together, he's been really decent, very friendly, very calm. He's in the detail. He reads his brief. He's very competent. And this is a guy that, you know, that is working really hard for the good benefit of the country. He's got the big calls right, in my view, since he became Prime Minister. We're becoming gradually more conservative. As a low-tax, low-state Conservative, that's a really good thing. I want to see tax cuts next year. But with the job that he's got, and it's an almost impossible job, he's done a really good job. And I'm very happy supporting him.
So you could say that, but you look at the data. The Labour Party now consistently for almost 2 years has been 20 points ahead in the polls. Your party is heading for electoral oblivion next year.
Well, people say that, and the polls are important, but of course we haven't got an election tomorrow, and a poll is simply a snapshot in time. I'm pretty confident that next year, when Rishi's 5 pledges come to bear fruit and the economy turns and inflation continues to fall and waiting lists fall, I think we'll be much better placed to go into an election. And this is about responsible government. People can't have what they want all of the time. This is about making tough decisions. And Rishi Sunak has proven over the last 12, 15 months that he can make tough decisions. I'd also say to you that look at what's happened to the SNP in Scotland over the last 6, 8, 9 months. You know, one camper van and one year later, they are floundering massively in the polls. Labour are resurgent, of course, in Scotland, but so are the Conservatives. So a lot can change in politics in a very short period of time.
And I suppose your judgment then, with regard to the timing of the next election, would be later rather than sooner?
Yeah, I mean, one option might be for England to win the Euros next year and to come back and have an election. With
That's
our
the Harold
fantastic
Wilson
summer.
trick, is it?
May well be. I mean, I don't know is the honest answer, but my instinct is that he'll go long, because I think that the longer he goes, the more improvement we'll see in terms of inflation in the economy. Interest rates also coming down would be fantastic, wouldn't it? So I think he'll go when he's ready, but ultimately we need to be ready as a party.
So perhaps October next year, November. The latest it could be, of course, is January 2025.
Well, of course, Boris showed, didn't he, in 2019, that December elections can be quite profitable and quite successful. So who knows? It's a decision for him. It's in his gift as the Prime Minister. He'll make it when he's ready. But I can tell you for a fact that the Tories will not be 20 points behind in the polls at the point of the election.
Well, James Sunderland, thank you so much for talking us through that and indeed indulging in some speculation on election timing.
Well, there we go. We've got so much more to come in the next hour. Bit of a change here. We'll be discussing the biggest losers in Hollywood. Any guess who they could be?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's a grey start out there for many of us. A lot of low cloud, rain and drizzle in the east, but the brighter skies are emerging towards the northwest as low pressure moves away. It's a weakening area of low pressure, weakening weather fronts, just bringing areas of cloud, quite extensive low cloud across eastern England with some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle moving in from the North Sea. That'll be on and off through the day, but brighter skies start to push into Scotland, Northern Ireland, West Wales, as well as the southwest, albeit with 1 or 2 showers. Temperatures staying at 9 to 10 in the south, 6 or 7 further north. Then into the evening, the low cloud finally in the east peels away. A clear slot crosses the country. Under these clear skies, there'll be a touch of frost for a time, some fog patches, but it doesn't last long because further cloud rolls in from the west from the early hours of the morning with some outbreaks of rain as well, followed by clear spells and showers towards the northwest. A mild start for most, but a chill in the air in the southeast as that cloud arrives during the morning, and then some, again, light outbreaks of rain affecting East Anglia and the southeast throughout much of the day, with some sunny spells elsewhere across the UK. Further showers into the north and west of Scotland, blustery here with a strong wind at times and feeling cold. Further south, mild.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 13th of December. Coming up.
Fight for survival. Rishi Sunak's popularity plunges to a record low in polling, despite seeing off a much-touted Rwanda rebellion last night. He may have won the battle, but will he lose the war?
Missing mum. The mystery deepens as the search for a 55-year-old woman enters its 5th day. Gaynor Lord disappeared near the River Wensum in Norwich last Friday and has not been seen since. We're on the scene.
Fall from grace. Prince Harry and Meghan have been crowned Hollywood's biggest losers by Showbiz Bible Hollywood reporter. $11 million.
Tom, I do wonder if the Conservatives are, well, in a little bit of a state of denial when it comes to just how unpopular they are at the moment.
Do you know what? I think I can totally see that. I think they were in a greater sense of denial around the time of their party conference, when they kept talking about some outlier polls and say, look, we're building back, we're going to be neck and neck with Starmer in months. And I think the fact that that hasn't happened, I think more and more do accept the reality that were an election held tomorrow, they would go down to a historic loss, a loss of John Major proportions. But yes, I do get the sense that there are some people who sort of hold hope, perhaps false hope, that things haven't been so set in stone.
Because I know this is just one poll, and, you know, they don't always reflect the truth. But really, net favourability rating for Rishi Sunak, -49. That's down by 10 points just from late November. So despite all this talk of getting tough on migration, legal and illegal, it's just not going through to the voters. And I saw another poll suggesting that only 1% of people in this country believe that this Rwanda bill is actually going to stop the boats. 1%.
No, there's a lot to talk about there, and much more to come as well. But that's after your headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you very much. 2 minutes past 1. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom.
The unity of the Conservative Party was mocked during the final Prime Minister's questions of the year. It's after 38 rebel Tories decided to abstain from a vote on the Rwanda bill last night, which passed with a majority of 44. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of being in a meltdown, but Rishi Sunak says the numbers on migration and the economy speak for themselves.
Down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from Honourable Friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he's kicked the can down the road, but in the last week his MPs have said of him he's not capable enough, he's inexperienced, he's arrogant, a really bad politician.
Well, last night's results was a victory for the Prime Minister, but Tory rebels have warned they'll vote against the draft Rwanda law in the new year unless it's amended. They say they want to ensure asylum seekers can be deported to the East African nation before the next election. Former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, who resigned last week over the bill, was among those to abstain.
Well, the public expect us to secure our borders, so I'll always fight for that. And I'm pleased that it sounds as if there's a way forward where we can make the bill better.
And are you going to be able to
Thanks
persuade the Prime Minister to change the bill at all?
Well, I certainly hope so. He shares my determination to fight this issue. Illegal migration is one of the great scourges of our time. It's doing untold damage to our country, and we're determined to tackle it.
Former Attorney General Sir Geoffrey Cox says a careful approach needs to be taken on the next reading of the bill.
This bill is not allowed to pass substantially as it is, there will be a growing momentum for something that I personally would regret and be reluctant to contemplate, which would be withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights. We are looking at a situation where the Democratic House has already asserted in a quite muscular fashion its concept of its sovereignty. And I think we need to reflect very carefully.
Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford has confirmed he's stepping down and will resign in March next year. The announcement has triggered a contest to find his successor. He hopes the new leader will be in place before Easter. The UK economy contracted faster than expected, with Office for National Statistics data showing a 0.3% fall in October. All three main sectors fell into negative territory for the first time since July, with services the biggest driver of the downturn. Manufacturing and construction was affected by poor weather. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Laura Trott, says the economy is turning a corner.
Well, the PM's top priority this year has been to halve inflation. And as a result of that, we've had to take some difficult decisions, and the Bank of England has had to drive down inflation by tight monetary policy, so that's high interest rates. That inevitably has an impact on growth. But the economy is turning a corner because of these difficult decisions that we've made, decisions which have been opposed by the Labour Party every single step of the way. But because of those difficult decisions, we've been able to do things like we did at the Autumn Statement a couple of weeks ago, reducing taxes on businesses and reducing taxes on working people, so we can focus on growth now and growing the economy.
James Bulger's killer, John Venables, has been denied parole, with the panel ruling he still poses a threat to the public. He murdered the toddler when he was 10 years old in 1993. Venables was released on licence in July 2001 and recalled to prison in 2010 after indecent images of children were found on his computer. The government's candidate for BBC chairman says Gary Lineker's criticism of the Defence Secretary appears to breach the corporation's social media guidelines. The former England footballer recently hit back at Grant Shapps after he questioned whether the Match of the Day host should be allowed to express his political views. The TV presenter was among a group of celebrities to sign a letter calling for the government to scrap its Rwanda scheme. Speaking to MPs at a pre-appointment hearing, Samir Shah said he didn't think it was helpful.
I think this last one, the one that identified specifically two politicians, seems to me on the face of it a breach of those guidelines. And I imagine the BBC is looking into that now. And the BBC is in favour of freedom of expression, as it should be, but also the duty to be impartial. Now, it's very clear when it comes to news and current affairs, and when it's not. But there is this grey area within which Mr. Lineker sits. And I share your frustration. I think I would certainly invite the Director General and his team to find a solution to this, because really we need to find a solution to this.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Thanks, Tatiana. Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was victorious last night, seeing off a potential rebellion by his own MPs as his Rwanda bill passed through the Commons with a majority of 44.
Now, despite every vote from Tory MPs being in support, some on the right of the party rebelled through abstention. However, the bill might see amendments come the new year.
Yes, Labour voted against the bill with a commitment to scrap the entire plan if they win the next election, whilst critics argue that millions allocated to Rwanda could more effectively be used to combat people smuggling gangs. So, has Rishi Sunak won this parliamentary battle, only to potentially lose the war?
That's the question. Joining us now is political correspondent Olivia Utley. Olivia, thank you for joining us. Shall I put that question to you? So has Rishi won the battle, but he may go on to lose the war?
I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. Last night felt like a bit of a Pyrrhic victory for Rishi Sunak. He looked pretty chipper at the end of the proceedings. He managed to get the second reading vote through with a higher than expected majority in the Commons. But it sounds, reading between the lines, as though he offered some sort of tweaks or concessions to the bill to placate those right-wing backbenchers and to stop them voting against the bill. Now, time will tell what's going to happen with those concessions, because of course the worry for Rishi Sunak is if he tweaks that bill too far, if he toughens it up much more than it already is, then there is a danger that those One Nation MPs, the 100 or so grouping of Conservative MPs on the left of the party, say, well, hang on a moment, we were prepared to vote for the bill in its unamended state, but with these tweaks that you've made, it strays too far away from international law for our liking, and then they could vote it down. On their own, there might not be enough of them to end up overturning the bill, but with Labour, and we know that Labour is going to absolutely decisively vote against it at every opportunity, Rishi Sunak could see it being overturned. Then, of course, even if he does manage to get it through the Commons, even if those 29 rebel MPs on the Tory right of the party accept the tweaks that Rishi Sunak makes, and the One Nations on the left of the party think that the bill is still OK, really, for them, then he gets it into the House of Lords. Now, the House of Lords is much more left-leaning than the House of Commons. Only a third of peers are Conservatives. And what we're expecting to see in the House of Lords is big amendments to the bill, which would then be sent back over to the House of Commons in what's known as parliamentary ping-pong. And we could end up in a situation where the bill is pretty much unrecognisable to the legislation that Rishi Sunak put on the table yesterday. And that in itself would be very, very damaging to the Prime Minister's authority.
It's such a curious process that it needs to take place. Of course, it could be quite a laborious and lengthy process, particularly if we get into ping-pong, as you suggest. But crucially, the report stage, the committee stage of this bill is the next along that route. And we just were speaking to James Sunderland, the PPS at the Home Office, and he was pretty reticent to say what he would tweak with regard to this bill. Have you heard any indications of what concessions might be being thought of with regard to what could happen at committee stage?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I have heard a rumour about the possible concessions that Rishi Sunak might have made to those right-wing Conservative MPs. Essentially, the problem that those MPs have with the bill is although it declares Rwanda a safe country in general, meaning that the scheme as a whole could get up and running, it leaves some wiggle room for individual migrants to go to the courts and say that in their own personal circumstances, it would be dangerous for them to be deported to Rwanda. Now, Rishi Sunak and the government have made the case over and over again over the last few days that they believe those circumstances, those mitigating circumstances, would be very few and far between. It would be women in the later stages of pregnancy who couldn't fly, or people with illnesses that couldn't be treated in Rwanda. The issue at the moment is that those rebels don't really believe him. They think that there will be all sorts of migrants who end up taking their cases to the courts, and they worry that with the help of those human rights lawyers, we could end up in a situation where very, very few migrants actually get deported. Now, the rumour I've heard is that Rishi Sunak might have been talking to Conservative MPs about the possibility of making it more explicit exactly what mitigating circumstances migrants could use as a reason not to be deported to Rwanda. So just sort of write into law precisely the promise that he's making to them. But of course, the whole point of not explaining exactly the circumstances in which a migrant can make a complaint to the court is that under international human rights law, migrants are supposed to be allowed, people are supposed to be allowed to make their own cases. So essentially that would be undoing the work that he's done. And there is a danger that even just going that far, the One Nationers and the left of the party would say, hang on, the whole point of this was that the courts should be allowed to decide. That's a human right that people can go to the courts to talk about their own issues. So there is a real danger for Rishi Sunak here that he walks a very thin tightrope and ends up falling down on one side or the other.
Thank you very much, Olivia Utley, our political correspondent. Of course, it could be that Rishi Sunak has made these promises with absolutely no intention of ever tweaking the bill to that effect going forward. Well, hoping that they'll stick with
We
him.
will see lots of MPs on that bill committee, and even if Rishi Sunak doesn't want people to bring forward tweaks to the bill, no doubt some MPs will. And I think that particular idea of delineating what are the, quote, compelling evidence pieces that migrants will be able to use under Section 41B of the bill. If they literally just said you can only appeal if you have some debilitating disease or are late-term pregnant, that could significantly tighten up that loophole.
It would, but would it suit all sides? That is the question. Joining us now is Matthew Goodwin, Professor of Politics and International Relations. Thank you, Matthew. You've been listening to what we've been talking about with Olivia, our political correspondent, but can we zoom out a little bit? I want to get your view on the state of the Conservative Party as it is. What are they getting wrong?
Well, they're getting a lot of things wrong, Emily. If you look at the national polls as we come to the end of 2023, they're still about 20 points adrift of Labour. They're still in the low to mid-20s in the polls. They're still on course for a historic and very heavy defeat. Now, if you look at the issues, it's not just immigration where they trail Labour. It's also the economy, tax, crime, even Brexit, all of these traditional Conservative issues. As far as voters are concerned, they're just looking at the Conservative Party and saying, well, you know, we don't really trust this party anymore. We think it's time for a change in Westminster. And the argument that was made, Emily, when Rishi Sunak was first appointed Prime Minister was that, you know, he was the guy who was going to stabilise the party. He was the guy who was going to get it back into a competitive position. But even his ratings this week have taken another tumble. He's as unpopular out there in the country now as Boris Johnson. So as we come to the end of the year, the short answer to your question is the Conservative Party is getting a lot of things wrong and voters want to change.
There's a theory that has been promoted by some commentators that this is a problem of Rishi Sunak's own making by raising the salience of the issue of migration. There's an interesting split between how Conservative voters and how Labour voters are concerned around this issue, a split that didn't exist several years ago, but Conservative 2019 voters much more concerned than Labour intended voters now. Could it have been that Rishi Sunak's rhetoric on this is actually just pushing people not towards his party, but away from it?
Well, I think firstly on the point about salience, let's just be absolutely clear. The reason we're all talking about immigration is not just because the Conservative Party is talking about immigration. We're talking about this issue because it's become a much more visible feature of our national life. We've got net legal migration at record highs. We've got illegal migration at their highest levels for 20 years. So to the commentators saying this was a mistake to raise the salience of the issue was raised by actual changes in the population. Now, in terms of the second aspect of the question, Tom, you're right in the sense that Labour voters, Remain voters, university graduates and professionals have, over the last decade, moved much more to the left on the issue of immigration. They're more supportive of immigration than, say, non-graduates, working class voters and older voters and conservative voters. So that divide is certainly opening up. But Rishi Sunak can't win the next election by appealing to Labour voters and Remainers. He can only really hold on to a majority by ensuring those 2019 Conservatives turn out and vote. So it's a pipe dream to say, well, he should give up on those voters and go after people who aren't going to vote Conservative anyway. And if anything, I think this debate reflects the ideological beliefs of the commentariat rather than the reality of what's going on out there in the country.
And I guess asking to be marked and judged on your ability to stop the boats and then not doing so is also going to be a massive issue for your popularity. Thank you very much indeed, Matthew Goodwin. Always appreciate your time. Professor of Politics and International Relations.
And I think it is worth noting that throughout this period, you've seen just the slightest tick up of Reform UK. It used to be 4-5%, now some polls put it on 11%. Perhaps Rishi Sunak's rhetoric, raising the salience of this, but also not delivering, is pushing people to other parties on the right.
And apparently only 50% of people know about the Reform Party. So there's that. Now, are the Sussexes, change of mood, are the Sussexes the biggest losers in Hollywood? They've certainly been in the spotlight for numerous reasons.
Well, in the latest blow to the duo, it's been revealed that their charity, the Archwell Foundation, has suffered a massive £9 million drop in donations this year alone.
Right, let's speak to our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, to make sense of this. Cameron, now apparently this is the showbiz Bible in Hollywood that has made Harry and Meghan, Prince Harry and Meghan, their biggest losers. Does this reflect the general mood in Hollywood around these couples, this couple?
Well, I think if you look on the surface of their finances, which obviously we've found out in the last 24 hours or so, it's not looking great for them, to put it mildly. So just to take you through a few of the figures here. So their 2021, they had $11 million of private donations. 2022, that dropped to just $2 million worth of donations. And overall, this year, 2022, 2023, they have lost around $600,000, not just because of donations, because of some other costs associated with running their foundation. That's their charity arm of the Prince and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, even, which is clearly not very good on the surface. However, a source, and I'm slightly sceptical, but a source has told the American publication TMZ that it doesn't actually matter that they've made more than $500,000 worth of a loss this year, because they've got $8 million in the bank. So I don't think they're going to go bankrupt anytime soon, but nonetheless, it's not a very good look for them.
No, it's not a very good look for them, Cameron. And then being voted or described as biggest losers, it's not going to be very good for the fragile egos that are Prince Harry and Meghan, is it?
No, and I think if you look back to Endgame, that's Omid Scobie's biography of, well, not biography, a look at the royal family, which was obviously very pro-Harry and Meghan. We spoke about that a lot last week, didn't we? Their popularity has not gone up after that book. If anything, it's, I think, backfired on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Of course, they maintain that they have never taken part in that particular book. But then they've been even more criticised yesterday for releasing a very glossy 1-minute video of all the charity work they've done over the last year, including meeting veterans, supporting veterans, packing bags for schoolgirls in Nigeria, and supporting Afghanistan women who've been relocated to the US. But the timing of the video being released has been called into question. Now, it could just be a complete coincidence that the video was released just hours after the Princess of Wales released a video of herself and her 3 children helping to pack bags at a baby bank. The cynic in me, and perhaps what's been reported widely on social media and online, is that it was deliberately timed, this video from the Sussexes, to upstage, or at least attempt to upstage, the Princess of Wales and her 3 children. As I said, it could just be a coincidence, but their last video and their last report on their charity work came out in January of this year. So by that standard, we shouldn't really have been expecting this report until next month.
Thanks, Cameron. Goodness me. Thanks, Cameron. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent.
All these subtle little tips you wouldn't notice unless people like Cameron Walker were scurrying away looking at reading between those lines.
Do you know what? I feel a bit mean sticking the boot in. I mean, being, nominated to be the biggest loser in Hollywood isn't very nice, is it, for anyone, even if you deserve it?
I don't know. If you're making $100 million from Netflix and $20 million from your book and $20 million from Spotify or wherever it was, I wouldn't be that
Is it Tiny Violin? But imagine if you were voted
violin.
biggest loser at GB News or something. It's not very nice, is
if
it?
GB News were paying me $140 million, I don't think I'd mind. But anyway, coming up, the search continues in Norwich for a mum of three, Gaynor Lord, who's been missing since Friday. We'll be live on the scene after this short break.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past 1, and the search is continuing for the mum of three, Gaynor Lord, after she was last seen at 2:45 p.m. on Friday.
Her belongings were found scattered in various locations throughout a local park and in the River Wensum.
Well, her white work shirt, yellow tank top and jewellery were found spread out at different sites across the city centre park, whilst her olive-coloured coat was found in the water.
On the scene for us is GB News national reporter Theo Giacomba. Theo, thank you for joining us. It's been a number of days now that the police have been searching for this missing woman. What's the latest on their investigation?
Yes, well, a very good afternoon to you both. It's now the 5th day that she has been missing. She was reported missing on Friday evening, and as you've just mentioned, on Friday afternoon she was seen leaving the city centre here in Norwich, leaving the department store that she worked in, and in the last few days several of her belongings have been found, and on Tuesday further belongings were found, and here at Wensum Park, just outside of the city centre, the police began to search this area. So that was yesterday, and a specialist dive team is currently on the scene at the moment. I don't know if you can see just over my right shoulder, there is a white tent there, and police have been going around that area trying to look for something which you can see from the distance. And just across the road to my right, there's a specialist dive team. Further members of them are just over there, and they've been going in and out of the park. But of course it's a concern for her family. She is a mother, 55-year-old. They'll be looking and wondering what has happened, and looking for further updates from the police. Now, Norfolk Police's police commander Wes Hornigold said our working hypothesis at the moment is that Gaynor is in the water. That's what we're working towards. And they also went on to say it's a missing person inquiry. There's no evidence at the moment to suggest that there's any third-party involvement here. This is a significant operation in terms of searching both the park and the waterways. Searching water is quite challenging, and what I've seen since I've been here is a boat going up and down the river here which runs through Norwich. But of course, for the moment, investigations here continue.
Well, Theo, thank you for bringing us the very latest on the investigation. We'll be back with you in the next hour to see if that investigation is turning up with anything. But of course, a desperately sad situation.
Yes, so joining us now is former Met Police Detective Peter Blexley. Peter, are you there? Yes, I am. Fantastic. Now, what happens in these sorts of situations from a policing perspective? A woman last seen on Friday in a park, items of her clothing found in various locations. What might be going on in the investigation right now?
Well, as we know, the police are deploying lots of assets here. They've used helicopters, they've used drones, and of course underwater search teams with sonar equipment. So many echoes of the tragic disappearance of Nicola Bulley back in February of this year, where items were also left by the waterside. We know that in that case, the police came in for some quite severe criticism about how they dealt with personal information and information that they released to the media. I'm sure that Norfolk Constabulary will have learnt lessons from Lancashire Police, one would expect, so perhaps that's why they're being quite cautious in release of information, whilst all the time their primary objective will be to find Gaynor Lord.
It seems that their working hypothesis, as Theo Giacomba was telling us, is that very sadly Gaynor Lord's body seems to be in the water. They're searching the water. I would expect at this point few people are holding out much hope that she's still alive.
Yes, although I'm sure the relatives, her 3 children, and all those who knew and loved her are clinging to the hope that there may be some other explanation, that she may be alive, and we've already heard pleas from the children urging her to make contact and return home. However, perhaps unlikely that option may be. It is, of course, a deeply, deeply worrying time for the family, and the police will be feeling the pressure. Theo, your reporter is up there, of course, and there are other media outlets that have sent reporters there. So their work is very much under the microscope, subject to scrutiny. And I'm sure that Norfolk Police will be keen to avoid the kind of criticism that their colleagues from Lancashire came in for.
Absolutely, they will. Thank you very much indeed, Peter Blexley, former Met Police detective. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, coming up, we'll have our expert panel on some of the day's most controversial headlines. From Oxford students being encouraged to use AI to write their essays, to young people too nervous to order their own food. All of that to come, but first it's your news headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you. 1:32. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The unity of the Conservative Party was mocked during the final Prime Minister's questions of the year. It's after 38 rebel Tories decided to abstain from a vote on the Rwanda bill last night, which passed with a majority of 44. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of being in meltdown, but Rishi Sunak says the numbers on migration and the economy speak for themselves. Well, last night's result was a victory for the Prime Minister, but Tory rebels have warned they'll vote against the draft Rwanda law in the new year unless it's amended. They say they want to ensure asylum seekers can be deported to the East African nation before the next election. Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford has confirmed he's stepping down and will resign in March next year. The announcement has triggered a contest to find his successor. He hopes the new leader will be in place before Easter. James Bulger's killer John Venables has been denied parole, with the panel ruling he still poses a threat to the public. He murdered the toddler when he was 10 years old in 1993. Venables was released on licence in July 2001 and recalled to prison in 2010 after indecent images of children were found on his computer. The UK economy contracted faster than expected, with Office for National Statistics data showing a 0.3% fall in October. All three main sectors fell into negative territory for the first time since July, with services the biggest driver of the downturn. Manufacturing and construction was affected by poor weather. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2522 and 1.1609 euros. The price of gold, £1,582 and 15 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 at 7,563 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 1, and it was a fiery Prime Minister's Questions today after Rishi Sunak's victory on the Rwanda bill last night. That's as Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister's party of being in meltdown and that the country was paying the price for it.
Yes, so joining us now is Clive Betts, Labour MP for Sheffield South East. Clive, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, it was a bit of an odd PMQs from Keir Starmer, we noted. A very different style of questioning from the usual. It seemed as though he wasn't really able to land a solid punch, as, of course, the bill did pass last night.
Well, passing is one description. It got through its first stage. And what we saw last night, of course, was a situation where many Tory MPs said they only voted for it because they're going to try and strengthen it and toughen it up when it gets into committee stage, which is the next part of the parliamentary process. Other Tory MPs said, well, actually, the bill was just as tough as it possibly could be without them not voting for it. So I think the Prime Minister's got real problems because he's got different MPs deciding to vote for it for completely different reasons. And that's all going to come unstuck when you get into amendments at committee stage after Christmas. You know, this hasn't been resolved. The Tories are still at war with each other, and that war's going to continue.
It'll be fascinating to see that committee stage process roll out. But just to focus in on Prime Minister's Questions today, your leader, the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, said that Rishi Sunak was a really bad politician, inexperienced, arrogant, and then used one of his questions to ask, is anyone going to come to his Christmas party? Was that a good use of parliamentary time?
I think he was pointing out that all those comments had actually been made by Conservative MPs, showing that the disarray and lack of harmony in the party opposite. And I think he was referring to the various parties that the Prime Minister has been trying to throw to woo his MPs to come and support him. So, yes, there was relevance there, but drawing attention to the internal fight within the Conservative Party, the criticisms that their own MPs are making of their own Prime Minister, because in the end the electorate knows that you need a united party, united government to run this country at a very difficult time, and we simply haven't got that.
Clive, Keir Starmer has suggested that he would look and consider offshore processing to deal with the issue of illegal immigration. Would you support that?
I think we have to look at all options. Look, nobody wants illegal immigration. One of the real challenges we've got is when people are here illegally, and certainly if they claim for asylum and then have it turned down, they often aren't sent back to the country of origin or another safe country. That should be done. The government isn't robust in that, and of course what we have is a massive backlog of people claiming asylum, over 150,000 still to be processed, all of whom are in accommodation at the taxpayer's expense. All that has to be looked at. Nobody wants people who are here illegally to remain. That's absolutely for certain.
Well, Clive Betts, thank you so much for your perspective live from Westminster after the final Prime Minister's questions of parliamentary term.
Now, we have our panel with us. Joining us now to discuss this, Associate Comment Editor at The Telegraph, Mutaz Ahmed, and writer and broadcaster Candice Holdsworth. Thank you very much. Mutaz, let's start with you. I have a feeling that the majority of the British public trust neither the Conservatives nor Labour when it comes to the thorny issue of immigration.
Yes. Well, look, there was a time at the end of Boris Johnson's government when it was a Get to Friday project. They would literally celebrate getting to the end of the week. This has become a Get to February government. Obviously, the One Nation group will reject any amendments. Even if the amendments pass, it's not clear that the Supreme Court will tolerate it. Parliamentary sovereignty is assumed, and the Supreme Court might decide that Parliament isn't actually totally sovereign.
How would they decide that? Because ultimately, the system of government that works, even though Tony Blair set up the Supreme Court to sit outside of Parliament when the law lords used to sit in the House of Lords, as many argue they still should, their job is to interpret the law passed by politicians, not to make law themselves. Have too many people got it into their heads that we're sort of living in the American system where there's some sort of constitution that sits above Parliament? Yeah. Surely Parliament is the ultimate arbiter of what is law in this country.
The problem is it's never been properly tested. So it's assumed because both institutions, Parliament and the Supreme Court and the law lords before that, sort of behaved in a way where they were reluctant to enter that territory. If it's decided now that this is the moment to test it, the Supreme Court could decide that Parliament isn't sovereign, Parliament doesn't have the ability to contravene international law in the way that they think they might be. Parliament can't decide what the facts are because the Supreme Court decided that the facts are that Rwanda is not safe. You can't just declare that. You have to prove it. And if that happens, that has never happened in the history of this country. It would be an unprecedented constitutional crisis and it would bring down the government.
Well, that's a fascinating thing to focus on, because we've been focusing, of course, on the parliamentary machinations of whether the House of Lords will abide by this, whether amendments will get through. But actually, I suppose, Candice, we can turn to you. The courts are another element in all of this.
They are, and especially in a time that we're in now, where you're not seeing a lot of cross-party support on things. So you look at prisoners' voting rights, for instance, and I know David Cameron has now mentioned this, there was a lot of support across Labour and across Conservatives.
This is when Parliament struck down the ECHR demanding that prisoners could vote.
They did. Well, you know, it's funny, it's the way these sort of things work. The ECHR sort of backed down. They backed off. They realised, you know what, the UK Parliament, this is what they want. They're representative of the people. We're going to stop this now. And this is what David Cameron is trying to achieve right now, but he's in a completely different political context. I mean, we've got an election coming up. Labour's not going to do anything that's going to help the Conservatives. In fact, this mess over Rwanda, it helps them, actually, because it makes the Conservatives look like they can't deliver on their promises.
Yes, and there has been some pretty damning polling out recently, not least this morning, that shows Rishi Sunak is just as unpopular as an individual, as a leader, as when Boris Johnson was on his last day. So that's not very good at all. Should we move on to something, a little odd story that we found in the papers today? And this is, I don't know what this tells us about younger generations, because it doesn't sing true to me. Here we go. A third of Gen Z and millennials are too nervous to order their own food in restaurants, study
Emily,
finds.
I'm surprised that you said Gen Z.
Gen Z.
Gen Z. Oh, this is one of my bugbears.
I'm terribly sorry. It's Gen Z. I just hear Gen Z all
You do.
the time.
You hear American said all the time.
Yeah.
It's no, I don't know. I'm a Z supremacist when it comes to that sort of language. I don't know. Hearing Z irks me.
Careful,
Gosh, no, that made me sound like I'm a Russian supporter, didn't it? That's
yeah,
what
just a little bit. So what do you make of this? Why do you think that young people are so nervous that they find it difficult to order their own food in restaurants?
So regrettably, I am at the older end of Gen Z, and so...
But you're still Gen Z.
I'm still Gen Z.
What are you defining as the cut-off here?
Well, it's 97, isn't it? Anyone born after 97 is Gen Z.
Right. I've always referred to myself as a zillennial.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about that. I thought the most interesting thing is that if we are to believe it, and I think it's probably a bit exaggerated, these young people are pathologically jealous and envious because it seems they're not afraid to order food because they're some sweet little recluses. They're afraid to order food because they're worried that someone else might order a better dish. And that's not a good sign for this generation.
Surely not.
I think so. And I think it has to do with sort of Instagram and showing off. You know, life has become about getting something to show it off rather than to enjoy it.
Oh, my goodness. So could that be the reason, Candice, that younger people don't want to find it difficult to order food?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of demographers, and the one that I really like, Neil Howe, he's done a lot of research into millennials and Gen Z, and he said one of the things, the defining characteristics about that generation is they are quite bound by social convention. So they do think a lot about what others think about them, and like the whole concept of FOMO, and we use social media a lot. It's the technology that millennials created, social media. We're a lot less individualistic than Gen X or baby boomers. So maybe that's playing into it a little bit. But I mean, I'm a geriatric millennial. So when I see stuff like that, I'm just like, what is your problem? There is nothing wrong with ordering a meal. I feel completely alienated from it. And I think it's true. I think, you know, these are broad brushstrokes that we paint with these sort of like generational archetypes. But I mean, if you're like me and you were born in the 1980s, and you probably have quite a different outlook than someone who's maybe born in the year 2000.
And this is so interesting because very often people go, oh, millennials, as if that refers to all young people. Some millennials are in their 40s now. And it's well, just about approaching. And it does seem, because I think millennial starts at 1980. But it is interesting that perhaps the difference between millennial and Z is that Generation Z have grown up with technology in front of them. They probably don't remember a time when McDonald's didn't have self-service checkouts.
I know.
And perhaps it is that difference of not needing to interact with humans that means people are afraid of it.
Well, I thought that this initially referred to people with eating disorders who might find it a bit anxiety-inducing when there's all the calories on the menu, but it doesn't seem to be about that. This is about menu anxiety, and one of the things that they say might be causing this is worrying about not being able to pronounce items on the menu. Apparently that is a common cause of concern. And yes, food jealousy as well. Are we just... should some young people, would they prefer to just stay in their rooms and just, you know, keep away from any kind of interaction that could possibly go awkwardly?
I can understand not pronouncing names, by the way. I don't go to French restaurants. I just don't bother.
Because of that reason?
For that reason.
Oh, my goodness, you have to give it a go.
It's a form of, probably, I'm a bit bigoted, but...
Isn't that half the fun, though, as a slightly obnoxious Englishman? You sort of go and turn up and we say Paris, not Paris.
Yeah.
I just point to a number, 42, so you don't have to pronounce it.
So you're part of the problem.
I am part
You're part of the problem.
My grandfather thought he could speak just about any language in this earth by turning up and saying English slowly and loudly. But perhaps we've lost that sense of confidence. I don't know.
Yes, but maybe that is. I mean, maybe it's true that we're, you know, obviously I'm saying it in a very generalistic way, but maybe, you know, younger people are more bound by social convention. They don't like that judgment of not being able to get something right.
It's interesting.
Right, well, I want to move on to another interesting story that caught our eye. So this relates to Oxford University, one of our top universities, if not the top university. I'm not sure. It's always between Cambridge and Oxford, and also London School of Economics sometimes. But yes, Oxford students have been told to use artificial intelligence to help them write their essays. Now, the Oxford University professor Steve News says AI should help you produce a much better essay than you would produce unaided if it's used thoughtfully and critically.
Well, this sounds like a good idea.
Absolutely not, Tom. What are you talking about?
Because we're all going to be using AI in the future. It's almost, it's like saying, oh, you can do maths, but don't use a calculator.
Well, what does Candice think? Do you really think that it's the same as starting with a blank piece of paper, forming an essay, then sort of just, I guess, editing something that a chatbot's written?
See, that's it. I don't use ChatGPT because it just seems too prescriptive for me. I'm sort of old-fashioned. I like the open-ended web, you know, going on Google and finding all my own results and making up my own mind. I'm very set in my ways in that way. And people tell me ChatGPT, it will, you know, give you a sort of ideological answer, or it will say that you can't use certain sources, and that sort of thing just doesn't appeal to me at all.
What does this say about our elite universities, though?
Well,
the fact that we're dumbing down, or could be seen to be dumbing down, education in this way?
Well, first of all, I take a very hard line on this. It scares the life out of me. I'm a comment editor. I have used ChatGPT.
Oh, yes.
I've asked it to write articles in the style of some of our columnists, and it is frightening and should be banned. No, I think it's basically...
You're not taking the Italy position of banning these things.
I'm afraid I am.
It could put everyone out of work.
No, this is pure Luddite thinking. This is the sort of thoughts of those who wanted to ban the combine harvester because it would get rid of too many jobs.
Well, this may actually end the world. I mean, I take the Elon Musk view on this, which is once you let the genie out of the bottle, you can't put it back in with this AI because it can surpass human intelligence. It would be the first time that has happened. And I think this is an example, actually, of the genie coming out of the bottle, when even the smartest students in this country are using, essentially, organised plagiarism to learn. I think that's a big problem.
But they're using it as a tool in the way that everyone will be using it as a tool in the future. Surely learning how to use this as a sort of way to augment your learning, not to replace your learning, but to use it as as Rishi Sunak always says, a co-pilot to yourself. Surely that's a good thing.
I understand what you mean, and I was listening to Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, and he was saying that in every huge every era in which we've undergone a huge technological shift, we've always been filled with fear about the future. But then we've adapted to it, and it's been OK. I must say, though, I do wonder, though, if this really is a massive shift where we actually make ourselves redundant, especially if it is, as Sam Altman has been experimenting with, not just this ChatGPT and the generative AI, but the cognitive AI, where the AI begins to think for itself.
It's learning on its own. And exponentially. And I think they already are, some of these bots, smarter than we are. And that is quite a scary prospect. We could end up having killer bots, Tom. This is something that should keep you up at night.
I don't think we're quite there yet, but there is, of course, plenty more to come. A big thanks to our panel, Mutaz Ahmed and Candice Holdsworth. We'll be back with them in the next hour, and we'll be hearing why a London GP is being investigated about extremism. Don't go anywhere.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's a grey start out there for many of us. A lot of low cloud, rain and drizzle in the east, but the brighter skies are emerging towards the northwest as low pressure moves away. It's a weakening area of low pressure, weakening weather fronts, just bringing areas of cloud, quite extensive low cloud across eastern England with some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle moving in from the North Sea. That'll be on and off through the day, but brighter skies start to push into Scotland, Northern Ireland, West Wales, as well as the southwest, albeit with 1 or 2 showers. Temperatures staying at 9 to 10 in the south, 6 or 7 further north. Then into the evening, the low cloud finally in the east peels away. A clear slot crosses the country. Under these clear skies, there'll be a touch of frost for a time, some fog patches, but it doesn't last long because further cloud rolls in from the west from the early hours of the morning with some outbreaks of rain as well, followed by clear spells and showers towards the northwest. A mild start for most, but a chill in the air in the southeast as that cloud arrives during the morning, and then some, again, light outbreaks of rain affecting East Anglia and the southeast throughout much of the day, with some sunny spells elsewhere across the UK, Further showers into the north and west of Scotland, blustery here with a strong wind at times and feeling cold. Further south, mild.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 p.m. on Wednesday, the 13th of December. Coming up this hour.
Fight for survival. Rishi Sunak's popularity plunges to a record low despite seeing off a much-touted Rwanda rebellion last night. He may have won the battle, but will he lose the war?
Missing mum. The mystery deepens as the search for a 55-year-old woman enters its 5th day. Gaynor Lord disappeared near the River Wensum in Norwich last Friday and has not been seen since. We're on the scene.
GP under investigation. An NHS GP who runs an extremist Islamist group has been referred for investigation by his NHS trust.
And aside from Prime Minister's questions, there's been another big story in the news today, and that's the resignation. A significant political resignation of the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, perhaps most famous for instituting 20-mile-an-hour zones across the Principality.
Or for the rather bizarre authoritarian steps he took with regards to the pandemic.
Yes, there were the odd sort of sections of shops that were deemed non-essential, closed off, taped up. That was a peculiar one.
It was very peculiar, but of course there have been lots of nice messages across social media from colleagues and from members of the Labour Party, senior figures. I've just got here Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband has said Mark Drakeford has been a great public servant for Wales, leading with integrity and progressive values and showing what Labour can achieve in government. I wish him all the best
Showing what
for the
Labour
future.
can achieve in government. Of course, Wales is the only part of the country that in the last decade has cut the NHS spend and indeed has instituted 20-mile-an-hour zones. Is that something to come? Who knows? But a new leader of Welsh Labour will be instituted by Mark.
Yes, let us know who that should be. Whether you think Mark Drakeford has been good for Wales, let us know, gbviews@gbnews.com. But let's get the headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much. 2 minutes past 2, I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom. The unity of the Conservative Party was mocked during the final Prime Minister's questions of the year. It's after 38 rebel Tories decided to abstain from a vote on the Rwanda bill last night, which passed with a majority of 44. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of being in meltdown, but Rishi Sunak says the numbers on migration and the economy speak for themselves.
Down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from Honourable Friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he's kicked the can down the road, but in the last week his MPs have said of him he's not capable enough, he's inexperienced, he's arrogant, a really bad politician.
Last night's result was a victory for the Prime Minister, but Tory rebels have warned they'll vote against the draft Rwanda law in the new year unless it's amended. They say they want to ensure asylum seekers can be deported to the East African nation before the next election. Former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, who resigned last week over the bill, was among those to abstain.
Well, the public expect us to secure our borders, so I'll always fight for that. And I'm pleased that it sounds as if there's a way forward where we can make the bill better.
And are you going to be
Thanks
able to persuade the Prime Minister to change the bill at all?
Well, I certainly hope so. He shares my determination to fight this issue. Illegal migration is one of the great scourges of our time. It's doing untold damage to our country, and we're determined to tackle it.
Former Attorney General Sir Geoffrey Cox says a careful approach needs to be taken on the next reading of the bill.
If this bill is not allowed to pass substantially as it is, there will be a growing momentum for something that I personally would regret and be reluctant to contemplate, which would be withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights. We are looking at a situation where the Democratic House has already asserted in a quite muscular fashion its concept of its sovereignty. And I think we need to reflect very carefully.
Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford has confirmed he's stepping down and will resign in March next year. The announcement has triggered a contest to find his successor. He hopes the new leader will be in place before Easter. The UK economy contracted faster than expected, with ONS statistics data showing a 0.3% fall in October. All three main sectors fell into negative territory for the first time since July, with services the biggest driver of the downturn. Manufacturing and construction was affected by poor weather. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Laura Trott, says the economy is turning a corner.
Well, the PM's top priority this year has been to halve inflation. And as a result of that, we've had to take some difficult decisions, and the Bank of England has had to drive down inflation by tight monetary policy, so that's high interest rates. That inevitably has an impact on growth. But the economy is turning a corner because of these difficult decisions that we've made, decisions which have been opposed by the Labour Party every single step of the way. But because of those difficult decisions, we've been able to do things like we did at the Autumn Statement a couple of weeks ago, reducing taxes on businesses and reducing taxes on working people, so we can focus on growth now and growing the economy.
James Bulger's killer John Venables has been denied parole, with the panel ruling he still poses a threat to the public. He murdered the toddler when he was 10 years old in 1993. Venables was released on licence in July 2001 and was recalled to prison in 2010 after indecent images of children were found on his computer. The government candidate for BBC chairman says Gary Lineker's criticism of the Defence Secretary appears to breach the corporation's social media guidelines. The former England footballer recently hit back at Grant Shapps after he questioned whether the Match of the Day host should be allowed to express political views. The TV presenter was among a group of celebrities to sign a letter calling for the government to scrap its Rwanda scheme. Speaking to MPs at a pre-appointment hearing, Samir Shah said he didn't think it was helpful.
I think this last one, the one that identified specifically two politicians, seems to me on the face of it a breach of those guidelines. And I imagine the BBC is looking into that now. And the BBC is in favour of freedom of expression, as it should be, but also the duty to be impartial. Now, it's very clear when it comes to news and current affairs, and when it's not. But there is this grey area within which Mr. Lineker sits. And I share your frustration. I think I would certainly invite the Director General and his team to find a solution to this, because really we need to find a solution to this.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was victorious last night. He saw off a potential rebellion by his own MPs. The Rwanda bill passed through the Commons with a majority of 44.
Yes, Home Secretary James Cleverly has insisted the government's Rwanda bill will not be killed by Tory rebels, in spite of right-wing Conservative MPs saying they could vote the legislation down at later stages. The bill might see amendments in the new year and, of course, will go through the ever-tricky stage of committees.
Yes, it will indeed. Labour voted against the bill with a commitment to scrap the whole plan altogether if they win the next election. Critics argue that the millions allocated to Rwanda could be more effectively used to combat people smuggling gangs. So, the question, has Rishi won the battle only to potentially lose the war?
Well, joining us now is our political editor, Christopher Hope. And, Chris, this is perhaps surprising to many, the degree by which Rishi Sunak won last night. But I suppose the real challenge comes in the new year.
That's right, Tom and Emily. Hello there from College Green in London here in Westminster. Yeah, definitely right. Now, we're seeing the shape now of the deal to be done with those right-wing Tories to ensure that they stay on board with this bill when it comes back in the second or third week of January. The PM spokesman has just told journalists the following. They look forward that the government is clear that any amendments must be done in a way that is legally credible, has the deterrent effect of stopping making sure that the flights can take off in the first place, and ensure the scheme doesn't collapse. Those are three red lines the government has now told the right. If you can put amendments down, but they must hit those three targets. That is narrowing the scope for amendments quite dramatically. This is the day after, of course, the big win by the government overnight, the 44 MP majority, far bigger than expected. And this is what's happened. The whips are now going to put the bite on those 29 Tory MPs who chose to abstain, pending further amendments, and said, well, look, it's a very, very tight space to work here. You may not get what you want. And that is fascinating. Also, just while I'm on, we've been talking to the chief spokesman for the Labour Party, that what happens if Rwanda flights do take off. And Geoffrey Cox told this programme over an hour ago, 2 hours ago, forgive me now, that he thinks is a better than evens chance that flights take off in May now, given the majority last night. I asked the spokesman for Labour what will happen if the flights take off, if it's starting to work. They said they would repeal it even if it's successful. That's fascinating. They see the problem they've got with it is it's a deportation plan, not an offshore processing plan. So the heart of it is not necessarily if it's successful. They don't like the idea of deporting people from here to be processed in Rwanda. They're not so against an offshore processing one, but it's the deportation part of Rwanda they hate, and they will withdraw it even if it's working, if they win the election.
Now, Christopher, do correct me if I'm wrong, but This is the first I've heard of any offshore processing policy from the Labour Party. Are they suddenly talking about this as an option?
They wouldn't go there. I did ask that question. No, knowing you'd asked that of me, Emily, I asked that question of the spokesman too. They're saying they're not going to get into what-ifs and any future plans. They noted that Germany do offshore processing, that in the UK, Ukrainians are processed offshore before coming to the UK if they're fleeing that country. The difference, of course, with this small boats plan is they don't like the idea of taking them from the UK, deporting them to Rwanda and leaving them there. That's the difference. So I wonder whether we're seeing an indication of what could be a new Labour idea, because they recognise that if Rwanda starts to work, then they're in quite a sticky position here, because they're going to fight the election on withdrawing Rwanda, but what replaces it? Their idea is 1,000 more Home Office officials to process the backlog and better cooperation with enforcement bodies on the continent. Is that enough? The Tories would say it's not.
It's interesting, they're proposing this sort of offshore processing. Might that mean, therefore, that flights go to Rwanda, people are processed in Rwanda, and then flown all the way back to the UK if they're deemed to be legitimate migrants? Could that be a possibility under the Labour Party?
Well, Labour is saying they would withdraw the Rwanda bill, which would assume would disapply the treaty with that country. They may come up with a different idea, processing somewhere else in the world, an offshore processing scheme. So rather than have them in hotels, maybe they're processed elsewhere. Again, we are very early stages, lots of ifs here, but I think the Labour Party is trying to work out how it responds to Rwanda if it's successful, Emily.
Well, this is very, very important to scrutinise, because we may have a Labour government in not too long and they need to decide what they're going to do. That is actually different from what the Conservatives are doing, because, of course, in the last however many years, what they've been doing is voting against the government on anything that they've been doing.
Sounds like they've been writing it on the back of a napkin as they've been talking to you, Chris.
That's a bit unfair, Tom. You know how it works here. I mean, they are looking at it, and they are aware. They are aware that they. I mean, we didn't know where we were yesterday. Had the Rebels won last night, Labour would have been put down a no confidence motion today to vote on tomorrow on this government. So that's why I think that Keir Starmer was slightly all over the place with his radar in that Prime Minister's questions. He wasn't really targeting Sunak on the things that mattered. And by the end, he said "Happy Christmas" in his final question. He almost gave up, and I think that was because the Tories got a win, a rare win, over Labour yesterday.
Also, Christopher, just to take you back to your first comments about, do you imagine that some of these Conservative MPs who decided to abstain rather than vote against the government are regretting their choice? Because if, these amendments have to fit within potential amendments have to fit within this strict criteria, then they may well not be getting what they want, and they've just done what the government wanted them to do.
I think you're totally right, Emily. I'll read those back to you once again. Any amendments that the government will look at must be legally credible, have the deterrent effect, and ensure the scheme doesn't collapse. Now, that is narrowing the scope of amendments. Don't forget, the European Research Group of Tory MPs put out that 10-page report on Monday, which was reported on your programme on GBNews. In that report, it said that the current bill will not work. Even it can't be amended to make it work. And we need to go back to the drawing board. That was their position on Monday, one of the lead rebel groups, the ERG. Well, today the government's saying, if you want to amend it, you can barely change it. And that is not good for the right. Yet again, the right will feel very bruised, Emily.
Yes, I think there might have been a bit of bluffing going on there.
But also, crucially, I suppose, the most restrictive of those three conditions is the one that says ensuring the scheme won't collapse. Because, of course, the Rwandans have been saying this is as far as you can go on notwithstanding clauses against international courts or domestic courts. It could, after all, be the Rwandans, then, that say, if you amend this too much, we pull back.
Well, that's right. The idea of the scheme collapsing was one raised by Rishi Sunak in his press conference last Thursday when we were able to get a question into the Prime Minister for GBNews viewers. He said there he went within an inch, he said, of Rwanda withdrawing altogether. The government's position is we've gone as far as we can't go any further. The bigger worry, I think, is finally on this from very, very senior people in government cabinet level, a minister I spoke to earlier. They're worried that the left wing, the One Nation group of Tory MPs, that if they put motions down to weaken it, Labour could vote with them. And now that's a whole different attack on this bill we haven't really discussed yet properly. But imagine if the left put in motions to try and weaken that idea of disapplying elements of the Human Rights Act, and then Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP all supported it. It could be a very, very narrow win. And bizarrely, the government might need the backing of the right to get it through.
Goodness.
There's a lot more to play.
Goodness me, Christopher, it keeps coming. It keeps coming. The excitement can barely contain ourselves over here. But can I get a line from you, a comment from you about Labour's Mark Drakeford in Wales? He's stepped down as leader of the Welsh Labour. What will he be remembered for, do you think?
Well, if you asked that of Emily of Rishi Sunak, he would talk about long queues for the NHS, the English NHS bailing out people living in Wales, crossing borders to be treated in English NHS hospitals. He made that or a point like that in PMQs, which was rather jarring with the tribute which Sir Keir Starmer played. I also think on the lockdown he is shown to be a meddling First Minister who's been happy to impose 20-mile-an-hour limits across Wales, which has led to all sorts of issues with organs getting on time for operations, for bus timetables being rewritten. Many would say, good to have slower cars in some places, but not across the board in so many other places. Also on lockdown, I think he did seem to, I would argue, maybe relish that we're getting involved in people's lives in Wales. Certainly my friends in Wales many of them were pretty cheesed off with the way their lives were being interfered with by the government. Having said that, I think he has lost his wife. He's had quite a tough personal few years, and in politics it's only about argument and ideas, and I'm sure all of GB News viewers will wish him well.
And I suppose it's always a luxury in politics to get to decide when you go, rather than other people forcing that decision upon you.
Yes, there is that.
Yeah, well, Christopher, thank you so much for bringing us all of that from College Green, just outside Parliament.
Yes, well, moving on. An NHS GP who also runs an extremist Islamist group has been referred for investigation by his NHS trust after he described Hamas terrorists as freedom fighters.
Yes, Dr Wahid Shaida is already facing an investigation after footage emerged of him leading a rally in central London in October, where some were heard chanting for jihad.
Quite incredible.
Well, our reporter, Charlie Peters, joins us now with more on this story. And Charlie, how on earth has it got to this point?
Well, a fresh investigation has been launched today after NHS North West London told us that it had reported Abdul Wahid's comments to NHS England and the General Medical Council, which they described as distressing comments. And they made that report because on Monday night on Talk TV, Abdul Wahid described Hamas, as you say, as freedom fighters. He also failed to condemn the terror attacks on October the 7th. He said that the killing of civilians would always be appalling. However, he said that so much of that day had been disputed and we just don't know what had happened. He's reiterated these comments on his Twitter account. Now, of course, there are so many reports from that day, first-person testimony, and hundreds of bodies, many of them innocent civilians from that day. So there's plenty of proof to refer to, but it appears that this NHS GP, based in Leafy Harrow, does not believe it is worthy yet of condemnation. So there's been a long timeline here in this GP's situation with the General Medical Council and the NHS and that investigation. But the update today is a fresh review after those distressing comments on Monday night. Now, back in October in central London at that rally after the terror attacks occurred on the 7th, he was calling for Muslim armies to intervene in the situation to deal with what he has described as an illegal occupation. He also described Hamas as a resistance organisation and said that what happened on the 7th, on Black Saturday, as it's known in Israel, where so many hundreds of people were mutilated and murdered in southern Israel, he said that this was an act of resistance, in fact, and not something that he was able to condemn at the time. So NHS North West London then reporting these new comments on Monday as distressing comments that need to be investigated.
It's quite incredible, or at least thoroughly depressing, that someone with these types of views would be working within the NHS. But this man, he is part of the Hizb ut-Tahrir group. Now, this is a prescribed group in some countries, including a lot of Muslim countries. Am I right? Are the government now considering prescribing this group here?
So in 2017, Indonesia actually revoked the legal status of this organisation. Its activities in Germany are prohibited, as in many other European countries. As you say, plenty of Muslim majority countries, as well. And that's because this group calls for the implementation of Sharia law and kind of a global caliphate for Islam, an extremely controversial demand, as you might expect, in many democracies. And so that group is prohibited in many countries, but it isn't prescribed in Britain. And that controversy flared, of course, in October when the organisation was seen marching and chanting soon after the terror attacks on the 7th. We don't know what the current status is and what the Met is thinking on prescribing the organisation. And of course, since that event occurred, we have had a change in Home Secretary. So plenty of things for James Cleverly to get to grips with. But we do know that the General Medical Council has received reports of concerns from locals in northwest London, in the area where this GP operates. They're concerned about his views, and patients have also reportedly told the GMC that they do not feel safe being looked after by this GP. So we'll await further updates from NHS England and the GMC as they continue their assessment of what he keeps saying.
Well, Charlie Peters, we know you'll be sticking on that story as any more developments take place. Thanks for joining us, though, here on Good Afternoon Britain.
I do worry how many people in this country may share his views. Very worrying indeed. Coming up, though, the search is becoming more desperate as mum of 3, Gaynor Lord, has been missing since last Friday. We are on the scene after this short break.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 2:26
Well, the search continues for mum of three, Gaynor Lord, who was last seen on Friday evening. Her belongings were found scattered in various locations through a local park and in the River Wensum.
Now, the latest development is that CCTV footage has been released, which TV viewers can see on their screens now.
Well, joining us now to discuss this development and the search in general is GB News national reporter Theo Chikomba. Theo, we were talking earlier that the police have been looking in the river. They believe that they might discover something in the river, but releasing this CCTV footage now suggests that perhaps hope shouldn't be given up.
Yes, that's right. Within the last hour, they have released this CCTV footage showing mother of three, Gaynor Lord, leaving the city centre. And she left her workplace department store in the city centre on Friday afternoon, and that has been released to help people to see what she was wearing. Some of those items, as you've just mentioned, have been found in this park. Now, just over my right shoulder, for those who can see, there is a white tent, and Norfolk police say that that area in particular is where some of those items were found, and that is an area they're going to be continuing to look into. There is a specialist dive teams who are working here. There is a boat which has been going up and down the river to hopefully find something that could help as part of their investigation. And also we've heard from the policing superintendent Wes Hornigold, who said our working hypothesis at the moment is that Gaynor is in the water. That's what we are working towards. It's a missing persons inquiry. There's no evidence at the moment to suggest that there's any third party involvement, and this is a significant operation in terms of the search. Both the park and the waterways, searching the water is quite challenging, but I do have to say that there is a strong team of people who are working here. Many of them are surrounding many areas of this park, but of course for the family they'll be hoping that if anyone has any further information, particularly after CCTV footage was released, that they'll be able to assist the police.
So, Theo, what we know so far, this image, this CCTV footage, showing the woman leaving the department store where she was working. She has a smile, and here's some more CCTV footage that we're seeing now.
Running.
She appears to be jogging through the streets, actually.
Very, very curious.
Very curious. So that was the last time she was seen. And now there is clothing of hers to be found in various locations in a park near this river. What else do we know? Presumably her family and friends are absolutely distraught.
Yes, one can imagine what's going through their mind right now, particularly leading up to Christmas, a time where family members and friends will be looking to come together. And of course, they are looking to hear and see what the police has been able to establish as part of their investigation. Now, they believe that Gaynor is in the water, but of course, they haven't confirmed that at the moment, as the investigation continues here at Wensum Park, just on the edge of the city centre here in Norwich.
I am fascinated by this footage. We're seeing her sort of rush through traffic, run down a road. She looks like she's in a huge hurry, perhaps running from something, running to something. This has really heightened the sense of mystery, for me at least. Theo, I'm almost lost for words. Why have the police decided to release this? Clearly, they've got more avenues of investigation than just looking in the water.
Yes, so apart from the CCTV, they're also appealing for anyone who has cameras on their doors, for example, and dash cam footage as well. This is part of their appeal, which they've launched in the last hour, and they're hoping that anyone who's got some of this footage is able to help them and pass it on to the police so that they can put together some of the evidence they already have, and some of which many people in this area might have to assist them and, of course, help them in this investigation. Now, police will be using all avenues in cases like this so that they are able to put everything together and perhaps find a conclusion in this case.
Thank you very much indeed. Theo Giacombo there, our GB News national reporter in the area. This is quite incredible, this CCTV footage, quite lengthy as well. We see the lady in various areas of the city centre there, looking like she's in a rush to somewhere or away from something. Well, we'll be on the scene to find out more when and if we receive it.
Yes, but before all of that, or indeed we'll be looking more at this royal rumble. Things aren't looking too rosy for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, so much more of that after your headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you. 2:32. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The unity of the Conservative Party was mocked during the final Prime Minister's questions of the year. It's after 38 rebel Tories decided to abstain from a vote on the Rwanda bill last night, which passed with a majority of 44. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of being in meltdown, but Rishi Sunak says the numbers on migration and the economy speak for themselves. Last night's result was a victory for the Prime Minister, but Tory rebels have warned they'll vote against the draft Rwanda law in the new year unless it's amended. They say they want to ensure asylum seekers can be deported to the East African nation before the next election. CCTV footage has been released of mother of three Gaynor Lord who's been missing since Friday. Police hope video of the 55-year-old leaving work in Norwich will help jog memories for anyone who's seen her. Her belongings were found in Wensum Park just hours after the footage was recorded. Police say her disappearance is out of character. Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford has confirmed he's stepping down and will resign in March next year. The announcement has triggered a contest to find his successor. He hopes the new leader will be in place before Easter. James Bulger's killer John Venables has been denied parole, with the panel ruling he still poses a threat to the public. He murdered the toddler when he was 10 years old in 1993. Venables was released on licence in July 2001 and recalled to prison in 2010 after indecent images of children were found on his computer. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
Now, Lucy Letby was struck off the nursing register yesterday during what was initially planned as a two-day hearing, but was concluded just in one day.
Yes, Letby was convicted of murder and issued a life sentence back in August. While she still pleads innocent to her crimes, she's formally lodged a bid to challenge her convictions at the Court of Appeal.
So joining us now is GB News reporter Sophie Reaper, who's been following this story from the very start. Sophie, can you bring us the latest? She's challenging her convictions. Could there be a retrial?
Well, there's plenty to discuss when it comes to Lucy Letby. I think after yesterday, people may now be thinking that, in fact, Lucy Letby, that may all be over, but that is definitely not the case. Obviously, back in the summer, we had those guilty verdicts, and then yesterday she was struck from the nursing register. But we still have plenty to come. So we have the statutory inquiry that's now ongoing. Trusts up and down the UK have been asked by Lady Justice Thirlwall all, for if they've considered putting CCTV onto the wards, and if they believe that it's a toxic environment in the NHS. We've also got a corporate manslaughter investigation currently being carried out by Cheshire Constabulary. That's into senior members of staff at the Countess of Chester Hospital, where Lucy Letby carried out her crimes. You mentioned there the appeal. So earlier on in the year, after those guilty verdicts, Lucy Letby and her team launched an application to make that appeal. So that doesn't mean they're going to be able to make the appeal. What it means is they've made that application to the Court of Appeal. That can take up to 5 months for a judge to review that process and see if they're going to be able to make that appeal. So we should be hearing about that sometime in January or February in the new year. We also have the retrial potentially of child K, allegedly was an attempted murder. The jury back in August were unable to come to a verdict on that, so we could potentially be having that. And we also know, just to keep the list rolling on, we know that Cheshire Constabulary are still investigating potential incidents carried out by Lucy Letby. They say that they have a duty of care to the people of Chester and beyond to make sure that, in fact, anything that she did, that they investigate it and bring it into the light.
Sophie, you've sat in that courtroom, you've listened to hours of testimony, you've seen Lucy Letby and the way that she has acted throughout this process. What do you think is going on inside her head that she maintains her innocence in the face of all of this evidence?
Well, it's really rather difficult. At the start of the trial, she seemed incredibly invested, but as we got into the verdicts, at first she was incredibly emotional. She seemed to be taking it really to heart. We heard her sob. There was at one point where she had to be taken from the courtroom at Manchester Crown Court because she was just too emotional. But then as things went on with the verdicts in August, she became stony-faced. There was no reaction. And as it got to a point where we had those 7 guilty verdicts on murder and 7 guilty counts of attempted murder, she just stopped coming into the courtroom. And of course it was highly controversial that she refused to appear for her sentencing a few days after she was given those guilty verdicts. And now we're at a point where she is in prison. She was given the whole life tariff, and it seems that she's going to be spending the rest of her life in prison. Of course, with her being stricken from the register yesterday, she did actually say that she was happy for that to happen, although she still does maintain that she is not guilty of any of the crimes she's been convicted of.
Very interesting to hear from your first-hand experience of sitting there in the courtroom. Thank you very much indeed, GB News reporter Sophie Reaper. Thank you for your time.
Well, coming up, we'll be back with our panel and some enormous stories to cover, not least...
The BBC, Gary Lineker. It goes on. Will he be given a red card? Finally.
I was going to talk about chocolate boxes, but you know what? We'll be doing it all. See you very shortly.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2:42 and things aren't looking too rosy for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Donations to the Archwell Foundation, their charitable arm, fell by almost £10 million back in 2022. Well, back with us to discuss some of these stories is the Associate Comment Editor at The Telegraph, Mutez Ahmed, and the writer and broadcaster, Candice Holdsworth.
And we must add, with Harry and Meghan, they've also been voted...
Or deemed.
Deemed, not voted, nominated... I don't know what you call it, described as the biggest losers in Hollywood, and that's by the Showbiz Bible, the Hollywood Reporter. Things aren't looking too great for the couple, are they, Candice?
No, you know, it's such a lost opportunity. They could have gone over there, created something completely new, pursued all these wonderful opportunities that America has to offer, but they pursued a kind of bitter agenda, and maybe there were financial reasons for it, maybe there were personal reasons for it, but I think it's damaged them. Maybe if they said one thing, maybe if they'd done one interview, that would have been okay, but I think it's just been a constant, steady stream, and a lot of people just don't like the drama.
And Mutaz, do you think that traditionally there's been this sense that Americans think about this in a different way to Brits, but now that Hollywood Reporter is sort of speaking along the same lines as some of the tabloid press over here in the UK, is that gap shrinking?
Yeah, I don't think it was true to begin with. You know, William and Kate are extremely popular in America. I think the Queen was popular in America for the same reason that she was popular here. I don't think, by the way, that Harry and Meghan could have done anything productive because they have no talent. And so this was the only path they could have gone down. But this is what happens when you chase fashionable causes, right? They die out.
Are you sure they have no talent? I mean, Meghan Markle was a successful actress. She was, of course, famously in Suits, and she married very well.
Did you watch Suits?
I've never seen it.
I did, to be fair. I did watch Suits, and I did enjoy it. I'm not sure if it was because of Meghan Markle's acting.
Well,
but...
it went on for too long, and it was very boring. But that's my opinion. No, but look, Americans aren't stupid. They're seeing through it, and they see that this couple who are millionaires, they live in a mansion, you know, one of them is a royal, inherited millions. They don't represent the dispossessed, and they don't represent the disadvantaged, and there's no point pretending that they do.
They do try to, though. I mean, Meghan Markle's podcast, it was all about... you know...
This is the podcast she got paid $20 million.
Yeah,
Yes.
women who have struggled with X, Y and Z throughout their lives, and it always came back to Meghan. And the problem is that once you're a multi-millionaire married to a prince, it no longer appears sincere anymore. But anyway, this Hollywood reporter that have deemed them the biggest losers of the year mocked them for their whiny Netflix documentary, their whiny biography, and their inert podcast. So there we go. Now, I want to talk about Gary Lineker now.
Yes.
Because he is back in the news.
Under the microscope.
Under the microscope, yet again, over potentially breaching the BBC's guidelines, yet again.
Now, these are the guidelines that were drawn up specifically to allow him to have public opinions, but he seems to have gone beyond even these. Candice, what's going on here?
Oh, I know. You do wonder with Gary Lineker, if the BBC had stood firm last time when they took him off air, but all his colleagues sort of rallied around him, and people said, well, you've got to make the decision now. Be firm with him, show that you won't tolerate this, but if you don't, you'll be in a weaker position and he'll feel emboldened. And I think that is what has happened now. I think Gary Lineker sort of thinks, well, I'm a bit untouchable, because last time you tried to do something to me, you weren't able to, you had no teeth.
But Candice, does he, like a child, need to be disciplined?
Well, I think he is... See, it's interesting. It depends which way you look at it. So I think he is undermining the credibility of the BBC as an impartial organisation. If you want the BBC to uphold that reputation, then that's very irritating. But for a lot of people, they'll think, well, that impartiality was never real anyway. They do have opinions. These people do have opinions. And maybe it's better that we see what their opinions are. However, with a licence fee, that makes people more reluctant to pay it.
And Mitas, is there an argument here that this guy talks about football on the telly? He's not a news broadcaster. He's not doing the bulletins at the 1 o'clock news. Shouldn't he have a bit of licence?
Look, he was a great footballer. I like his commentary. He's been very kind to Tottenham. But the BBC title gives him credibility, and with that comes responsibility, and he's obviously taken the mickey. But I think this is where Samir Shah comes into it, because not many people know who he is. And I followed his work at the Ethnic Disparity Commission with Tony Sewell.
And this is the government's preferred candidate to become the next Director General.
Exactly. And this is a man who, throughout his career, one of his focuses has been race. And in analysing race, he always goes with the facts rather than sentimentality. And that's annoyed the activists. But he's always focused on facts. And you see that now with his judgment that Gary Lineker probably did break the rules, which the BBC management aren't admitting to yet. I think he's going to change things.
So he's quite unemotional about things.
Yes, and he understands that the BBC needs the trust of the people.
What about... Sorry to interrupt. What about... So even if you approve of what Gary Lineker says, or you think that it doesn't matter too much because it's his personal social media thread, and it's fine that he signs these open letters about the government's policies and things like that, he's becoming just a bit of a headache for the BBC at this point. He's hugely paid. Would it just be easier for the BBC to avoid this endless controversy over the man, to just sort of, you know, part ways?
He's a £1.3 million headache, and it's not like there aren't other football commentators, and other channels do football commentary very well and get a similar-sized audience. So there are alternatives, but Gary Lineker also has... You know, he's formed a sort of trade union in the BBC. If he's sacked, they might all go on strike again. So we'll see what happens.
But it must be very difficult because, of course, the BBC has sort of twisted and turned trying to create these new terms of reference. One set of terms for people who work in news and current affairs, another set of terms for people that are, as I believe Gary Lineker is, on sort of a contracted relationship rather than a direct employee. They were pretty liberal terms. He was allowed to say that he hated the Tories. What he wasn't allowed to do was personal insults against ministers, and this is what he appears to have done in this case.
Yes, and name someone specifically, which you're not allowed to do. I think it's true. If someone's not in news or politics, you think, well, why does it matter how they express their opinion? But he's so well known. I mean, he's a huge figure, so it does actually. He does represent the BBC, so that's why people get so irritated about it. And I don't think that he displays much discretion himself. I mean, he clearly wants to express his opinion, and he thinks we're all entitled to hear it.
I just think there's quite a lot of hypocrisy here, because let's say he was on the right of politics. And he was using his platform to talk about how he thinks immigration has been far too high and that we need to turn back the boats or something like this. I can't imagine the sort of lefty-lovey type saying, oh, no, the BBC must keep him. He's allowed to talk, you know, whatever he thinks. Can you?
Two words, Jeremy Clarkson, right?
Yeah.
And I think another example, I really don't like Carol Vorderman, but if you're Carol Vorderman, you must feel really annoyed at the moment, because she left BBC Wales feeling that the new guidelines would stop her from promoting her left-wing opinions, which she was probably right to leave, but given that Gary's able to go on Twitter and say whatever he wants, she must feel particularly aggrieved right now.
It's interesting, though, looking at people like that, or indeed looking at Emily Maitlis or John Sopel now. They've left the BBC and are now having glittering careers on the radio, being able to say, well, some people would argue they, at the BBC, were pretty liberal with how they expressed their political views. But surely, I mean, we have a wonderfully pluralistic media scene in the UK now. If you want to have political views, you can work for all number of organisations, just not the BBC.
I know, there's so many options now. There's a huge number of options, and maybe that's also why there is a bit more of a backlash now, because people do want to know what your opinion is. As a journalist, most journalists are pretty opinionated. It almost seems a bit anachronistic having this model now in the way that we live.
Now, this is an outrage. Moving on. We're going to move on.
We've covered Gary Lineker, we've covered Harry and Meghan, but I think perhaps the most controversial part, certainly the bit that gets me the most angry of this whole discussion, is Christmas chocolates. This is a box of Quality Streets.
I made these earlier.
Other brands are available. The reason we have these here on the table...
Well, go on then, let me have one.
...is that this box is a lot smaller than previous years. It's known as shrinkflation. I believe we might have some images of previous boxes of Quality Streets and sweets over the years. We'll see if we can get them up. But here we go. The tin has shrunk. Year on year on year, you're getting less for your cash. Candice, this is a national disgrace.
It is a disgrace, but we're going to see more of this now, especially with manufacturing costs going up and energy costs. We're going to be paying more for less. Even with your electricity, you freeze through most of the winter and you pay through the nose for it. And it's happening with our sweets now as well.
That is quite a big difference, isn't it? That's a lot of shrinkage. And I imagine you're paying more for it.
You are.
I think with chocolate, it's probably not a bad thing.
Oh, no.
You may not be able to see it, but I recently came off Ozempic.
Oh, really?
And one of the things
this is the jab.
This is the weight loss jab, yes. And one of the things it did was it killed my chocolate addiction. And in hindsight, actually, I probably would have paid more for less.
You had a chocolate addiction. Oh, sorry.
But thank you. Thank you.
Put them away.
But look, we live in a capitalist society. Thankfully, we live in a capitalist society. I think they're probably forming an assessment based on profit, and people can vote with their wallets. And if it doesn't work, then they'll have to bring the big boxes back. But we'll see.
But I mean, some of the statistics here. I mean, Celebrations. This is Quality Street, but Celebrations is another brand you might buy at Christmas. Made by Mars, shrank from 750 grams to 600 grams, but increased the price by 50p. And there was one that was even more outrageous. One went from 850 grams to 550 grams. That's almost, you know, chopped in half.
Emily, I think there's only one way to really assess what is actually going on here. Like, I notice you've hidden the box away from us. I think we should have a little try of these sweets.
Well, there aren't that many, are there?
These are the special... shall we hand the box around in case anyone else wants to grab?
I don't want to trigger the...
I think it's important that just in our final little bit of the show we can... See, I swear these were longer. These used to be longer, these little chocolate fingery fudgy things.
But maybe you were just smaller.
Maybe. Very good point. And policemen are getting younger.
Right, well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much, Mutaz Ahmed Kuwas, associate comment editor at The Telegraph, and the writer and broadcaster Candice Holdsworth. Thank you very much indeed for your time. That's it for us today. It's been a fantastic show. Lots going on, as always. You enjoy that. But up next, it is Martin Daubney, so stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It stays cloudy for many of us today with some showery rain, especially in the east, but towards the north and west, skies are brightening as low pressure peels away into the near continent, taking its weakening weather fronts with it. These weather fronts are, though, still providing the focus for cloud, a lot of low cloud, some patchy rain and drizzle into eastern and southeastern parts of England through the rest of Wednesday. By around midnight, most of that's petered away, the cloud starts to thin, and a clear gap between weather systems emerges with a touch of frost and some fog as that crosses the country. But then temperatures rise by the end of the night as another area of cloud and outbreaks of rain move in. Eastern Scotland, much of northern and central England, the southwest and Wales starts off with cloud, outbreaks of mostly light rain. Now that pushes east into southeastern parts by the afternoon, where it will be dull and damp after a bright start. But skies brighten elsewhere, especially for western parts of England, Wales, into Scotland and Northern Ireland. However, northern and western Scotland prone to a strong wind, touch of gale force winds around exposed coast, and quite a number of showers moving in. Similar conditions for Friday, showers and a strong wind for western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. Elsewhere, bright skies to begin, slowly turning cloudier, and really the outlook says it all. A lot of cloud expected this weekend, but it will be mild, especially by night.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.